Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place in the cosmos where your thoughts can unwind and knowledge becomes a soft lullaby for the night. Tonight, our journey will take us into something that's been guiding you all along, quietly, invisibly, like a current beneath the surface of your days. It doesn't glow or hum or leave a trace on your skin, but it moves you. Every choice, every spark of curiosity, every tug of wanting. It's not a force of nature like gravity, and not quite a feeling like joy or fear. It's more like a whisper that lives inside you, a pulse that says, maybe this, or just one more. Tonight we're going to drift through the story of dopamine, the molecule that writes small footnotes in your mind each time something matters. But before we begin, if you find comfort in these quiet explorations, if they give your thoughts a soft place to rest, I'd be deeply grateful if you gave this video a like or subscribed. It helps this little channel find others who need a peaceful pause too. And when you're ready, you can tell me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I always love seeing how our tiny constellation of minds gathers from every corner of the planet, each of us wrapped in our own rhythm of day and night. Now, feel free to dim the lights. Maybe there's the quiet hum of a fan nearby, or the gentle sound of rain outside. Let your shoulders drop, your breath slow. Because the story we're about to tell begins in the smallest corner of your brain, and yet it reaches everywhere. Dopamine doesn't arrive with fireworks. It doesn't announce itself like a drumbeat. It moves quietly, like the moment before you smile, or that tiny lift in your chest when a new message lights up your phone. It's the heartbeat of curiosity, the thread between boredom and action, the hum that turns potential into motion. Most people have heard dopamine called the pleasure chemical, but that isn't quite right. Pleasure is what happens after you find something. Dopamine is what helps you look in the first place. It's not the bite of cake. It's the smell of it baking in the other room. It's not the applause at the end of a performance. It's the pulse in your hands just before you step on stage. You could think of it as a soft wind at your back, not pushing, just hinting at direction. When dopamine rises, it feels like interest, like the spark that makes you say, yes, let's try. When it settles, it feels like calm, or sometimes like emptiness. That quiet moment after excitement fades, when the world feels still and your mind begins to wander again. That rise and fall isn't random. It's your brain's way of learning what matters. Imagine for a moment that your mind is a vast landscape. Valleys of memory, rivers of thought, forests of sensation. Dopamine is the sunlight that moves across it, touching certain places, leaving others in shade. Wherever it shines, your brain learns to return. A new idea, a warm smile, a favourite sound. Each one marked softly with, this felt good, remember this. Over time, those small signals form paths. You might not notice them, but they're there. Trails your mind walks again and again, searching for the next bright patch of light. Everyday life is full of these invisible markers. The ping of your phone, the smell of morning coffee, the sound of your name spoken kindly. Each of these moments is a tiny conversation between your cells, chemical messengers carrying a message that says, pay attention, something meaningful might be happening. And even though that message is microscopic, it changes everything. Scientists sometimes describe dopamine as a bridge between the ancient and the modern parts of the brain, between the deep instinct that says seek, explore, survive, and the newer circuits that say plan, imagine, create. It's the chemistry of curiosity. Without it, life becomes grey, flat, without sparkle. Too much of it, and the world becomes noise. Every possibility shouting at once. Just the right balance, and you feel alive. Open to the unknown, steady enough to choose. If you could shrink yourself down, far smaller than a dust mote, and travel into your brain, you'd find a delicate constellation of cells glowing with quiet purpose. Tiny messengers drift between them, carrying whispers from one to another. Remember this. Try that again. This might be worth it. Dopamine is one of those whispers. It's made from simple things you already know, from the nutrients in your food, transformed inside your cells into a molecule that can move thought into action. It's chemistry turned into motivation. In your brain, dopamine travels along slender paths, 4 main ones, like small rivers winding through a forest. One flows toward joy and reward, reminding you what feels good. Another carries focus and determination, helping you finish what you start. A third helps your body move smoothly, guiding muscles and rhythm. And the last one, hidden deeper still, helps keep your hormones and energy in balance, quiet as a heartbeat. Each of these rivers runs on the same current, but they shape your life in different ways. And what's remarkable is how they work together, without you ever noticing. The same molecule that helps a dancer find grace in motion helps a scientist stay absorbed in a problem or a parent feel joy at a child's laughter. Dopamine doesn't choose your goals. It simply says, this mattered. It learns what you reward, attention, comfort, curiosity, and builds a map around it. Sometimes that map can lead us astray. It can draw circles around habits that feel good in the moment but leave us hollow later. Other times, it anchors us to the quiet joys that make a life, the steady satisfaction of a well-done task, the peace of a sunset, the comfort of familiar laughter. Dopamine doesn't judge, it only notices what you return to, what you mark with your attention, what you linger on just long enough to say, yes, that. So as we begin this journey together tonight, think of dopamine not as a controller, but as a companion, a storyteller that traces the outline of what you care about. Every hope, every curiosity, every late-night question you've ever followed has carried its signature. It's not the voice in your head. It's the echo behind it, the quiet reminder that life is full of maybe, and maybe is what keeps you moving. If we follow that whisper a little further, we'll begin to see how this small molecule speaks through circuits, habits, and choices, how it writes the invisible rhythm of wanting and learning beneath everything you do. If we follow the thread a little further, we arrive at a curious truth. Dopamine's magic doesn't live in what you already have. It lives in what you almost have. That little stretch of space between not yet and maybe soon. It's the reason you check your phone when you know no one has messaged, the reason you peek into the oven before the bread is done, the reason you replay the song just to feel the rise before the chorus again. Dopamine doesn't celebrate the reward. It celebrates the possibility of reward, the thrill of approach, the hum of anticipation. It's the feeling of your mind leaning forward, chasing the shimmer of what could be. If serotonin is the sigh of satisfaction, dopamine is the breath you take, right before it. Imagine for a moment that your brain is a storyteller sitting by a campfire. Every spark that leaps from the flame is a potential idea, a path, a chance. Dopamine is what nudges the storyteller's hand, saying, what if we follow this one? It keeps the story moving. Without it, the narrative stalls. No curiosity, no pursuit, no drive to see what happens next. This is why waiting can feel so alive. Think of the moments before a trip, the night before a celebration, the pause before someone you love walks through the door. The happiness isn't only in the event itself, it's in the build-up, the countdown, the almost there. Dopamine is what colours that time with energy and possibility. It transforms patience into participation, even when you're doing nothing but waiting. Scientists call this the anticipation signal, but we can think of it more softly, as a promise written in feeling, a quiet soon that gives meaning to the present. When your brain expects something good, dopamine rises slightly. not in a surge, but in a gentle wave that makes everything seem brighter. You walk differently. You notice more. The world feels charged with potential, but there's another side to that story. The same molecule that drives ambition and curiosity can, in its restless state, make peace feel uncomfortable. If life becomes too calm, too predictable, dopamine whispers, isn't there something else, something more? That whisper once kept early humans alive, helping them search for food, shelter, safety. But in the modern world, it sometimes turns into an endless chase. More messages, more tabs, more goals. You can feel it in the small moments, the way you reach for your phone when nothing's happening, or how finishing a task doesn't feel like rest, but like permission to start another. Dopamine doesn't mean harm by this. It's simply doing its job, reminding you that life is motion. But the art of balance lies in teaching that motion to rest now and then, to pause in the middle of the story without fear of missing the ending. In your brain, this dance between wanting and having is not a single light switch. It's a delicate rhythm of signals and pauses, a pulse that flows along tiny rivers of cells. When those cells sense that something valuable might be near, a sound, a scent, a familiar pattern, they send out dopamine in a shimmer of excitement. When the reward finally arrives, the signal fades. The system says, lesson learned. It's not the joy of getting that matters most, it's the lesson of the journey itself. You might picture this like a bell that rings louder when the reward is uncertain. If you always get what you expect, the brain grows quiet. But if life surprises you, with kindness, with beauty, with something unexpectedly delightful, dopamine lights up like a sparkler in the dark. That spark is called a prediction error by scientists, but we can think of it as the brain's way of saying, oh, this was even better than I hoped. This is why novelty feels so fresh. A new song, a different cafe, a stranger's smile, they all carry a hint of unpredictability, and the brain leans forward to meet it. Yet that same love of novelty is also why routines can grow dull, and why we sometimes mistake rest for boredom. The balance, as always, lies in variety that feels meaningful, not endless. A walk on a familiar street can feel new if you notice it differently. The sound of leaves, the texture of light, the rhythm of your own steps. The molecule doesn't care what's new, it only cares that you do. There's a quiet beauty in understanding this. The things you crave, success, affection, adventure, even inspiration, are not wrong to want. They are part of the way your brain keeps the story of you alive. But when those wants become a constant chase, they stop being a story and start becoming noise. The challenge isn't to silence dopamine, it's to learn its language, to listen when it whispers and smile gently when it shouts. You can feel this lesson in your daily life if you pay attention to the small hum before satisfaction, that lift of anticipation before the sip of tea, the inhale before a favourite melody, the tilt of expectation before the first bite of something warm. Those are the moments when dopamine is at work, sketching outlines for meaning. The world feels sharper, more alive, more possible. And then, as you exhale, serotonin arrives, wrapping the moment in contentment. The two work together, the seeker and the settler, the explorer and the rest. When you begin to notice the rhythm between them, you also begin to notice the power of pausing. The space between wanting and having isn't an empty gap. It's the place where curiosity lives. It's the mind's way of practicing hope. Each time you lean towards something good, even quietly, your brain learns that life is worth exploring again. So, if you've ever wondered why anticipation sometimes feels sweeter than arrival, it's because your brain is teaching you to love possibility. The same circuit that once guided hunters toward food now guides you toward meaning. A new idea, a kind word, a song that makes you remember who you are. It's not control, it's connection. The chemistry of wanting is really the poetry of staying curious. And as that soft hum of curiosity continues, it carries us deeper into the landscape of how dopamine moves through us. The rivers and pathways it travels, the hidden connections that turn chemistry into feeling and feeling into motion. Our quiet exploration now turns to those hidden pathways themselves, the delicate circuits that carry the mind's whispers into action, shaping the unseen architecture of desire, focus, and joy. From here, the story opens into the quiet architecture of the brain itself, the soft machinery beneath every spark of thought. It may seem impossible that something as small as a molecule could orchestrate something as vast as emotion, or memory, or purpose. Yet within your skull, billions of cells are holding a constant, wordless conversation. And dopamine is one of the languages they use, a language made not of sound but of movement and timing. Imagine standing above a map of the brain, not the way scientists draw it, but as a living landscape, valleys glowing with memory, wide plains of attention, winding streams of feeling. Through this terrain run 4 delicate rivers, each carrying dopamine along a different route, each one feeding a different part of who you are. The first of these is the river of reward, the one that flows through the heart of your motivation. It begins deep in the midbrain, in a tiny region that acts like a spark generator, and winds its way toward a structure that lights up whenever something feels worth repeating, a place that smiles in its own chemical way whenever life surprises you with pleasure or meaning. This is the circuit that helps you learn through joy. When something delights or intrigues you, dopamine ripples down this river, leaving a small mark that says, "Remember this. Do it again." It's why the scent of rain or the taste of coffee can make you feel something larger than the moment itself. Your brain once learned that those sensations carried reward. The second river is the river of focus and foresight. It connects the same deep region to the part of your brain behind your forehead, the area that plans, reasons, and imagines the future. If the first river gives you the spark to begin, this one gives you the patience to continue. When you hold your attention steady, writing, painting, fixing something, studying, dopamine here helps keep the rhythm. It's the chemistry of persistence, of thinking one step ahead. Without it, effort would feel like walking through fog. With it, you feel the subtle satisfaction of progress, the quiet reward of simply staying with it. The third river runs in rhythm with movement, the river of motion. It flows between 2 hidden regions that coordinate how your muscles move and how your body finds its balance. Every graceful reach, every smooth step, every act that feels effortless has dopamine running behind it, tuning the dance between intention and motion. When this river begins to dry, as it does in the illness we call Parkinson's, movement itself becomes slow and stiff. The body still wants to act, but the music that guides it has gone quiet. And when this river flows too wildly, motion becomes restless, scattered, like a dance that's lost its beat. Dopamine's task here is not excitement, but harmony. The fourth river, often overlooked, is the river of balance and inner regulation. It runs through the area that governs hormones, the silent orchestra that keeps your body's chemistry in tune. Dopamine here helps maintain calm between wakefulness and rest, hunger and fullness, passion and peace. It may not bring pleasure, but it keeps the background hum of your biology steady, like a metronome ticking beneath the melody of life. When all 4 rivers flow in harmony, you feel grounded. You can move, focus, anticipate, and rest. They are the quiet infrastructure of being human, 4 invisible threads weaving movement, thought, feeling, and balance into one continuous pattern. But dopamine's language isn't made of words, it's written in timing. Each of these rivers doesn't simply release dopamine, they send it in gentle pulses, like waves lapping on a shore. Sometimes the flow is soft and steady, a baseline hum that keeps you alert. Sometimes it arrives in small bursts, like a spark jumping from one stone to another, marking a moment as significant. The balance between these slow and fast rhythms, what scientists might call tonic and phasic, is what gives the mind its musicality. You could think of it as the difference between the steady background note that keeps a song coherent and the bright melody that dances on top of it. Too much melody, and it's chaos. Too much drone, and it's dull. Harmony lies in the blend. What's extraordinary is that this balance changes constantly with experience. Every breath, every colour, every small choice you make sends ripples through these rivers. Dopamine adjusts, learns, reshapes. It's not a static substance, but a living rhythm, responding to life as it unfolds. You might imagine it like water in a landscape that's always shifting, carving new paths when you learn something new, flooding briefly when excitement arrives, receding when rest is needed. Over time, those channels form habits, preferences, and even parts of personality. There's a quiet comfort in knowing that even your smallest joys leave traces, not as marks on your skin, but as gentle changes in how your mind listens to the world. Every moment of focus, every act of kindness, every small accomplishment strengthens one of these rivers, encouraging the current to flow a little easier next time. In that way, dopamine doesn't only record pleasure, it records effort, meaning, and the simple act of showing up. Picture your brain again, not as a machine, but as a landscape of rivers under moonlight, each one shimmering in its own direction, yet all returning to the same sea. That sea is you, the whole of your lived experience, your memories, your motion, your mind. Dopamine is simply how the water moves. As you rest tonight, it's likely flowing still. Tiny pulses of light travelling through those hidden paths, keeping you ready to wake, to notice, to reach, to love. It's not a chemical that controls you. It's a companion that carries you forward, learning with you. And as we linger in that image of rivers and light, another question rises gently to the surface. How do these messengers actually speak to one another? How does one neuron, one tiny cell, tell another that something matters? If we trace the pattern a little deeper, we'll find dopamine's quiet alphabet, the way signals leap across invisible gaps, the secret language through which thought becomes motion and curiosity becomes memory. As the tide of thought shifts, we can drift closer now to see how those rivers of dopamine actually carry their messages. The brain is full of hidden crossings, places where one nerve cell ends and another begins. Between them lies a gap so tiny that even the smallest dust particle would be too large to fit. Yet that tiny space, invisible even under a microscope's gentlest stare, is where your every thought, emotion, and movement is born. It's where dopamine does its work. Imagine two neighbours standing on opposite sides of a narrow alleyway. They can't step across, but they can toss small notes to one another. The first neighbour writes a message, folds it into a paper airplane and sends it sailing through the air. If it lands in the other's hands, the conversation continues. If not, silence. In the same way, one neuron sends dopamine across that microscopic space, hoping the next one is listening. Inside each nerve cell are tiny bubbles filled with chemical letters, thousands of them. When the cell is ready to speak, those bubbles drift to its edge and release their contents into the space between cells. The dopamine molecules float across, guided by nothing more than motion and chance, until they find their matching receivers, small docking sites on the next cell surface. You could think of these receivers as locks, and dopamine as a collection of delicate keys. Each key fits only certain locks, and when it clicks into place, the door opens and a message flows through. But unlike words on a page, these messages don't last. Once dopamine has delivered its signal, a spark of motivation, a trace of focus, a note of reward, it must fade. The brain is careful. It doesn't like echoes that linger too long. so it has quiet sweepers, special proteins that collect the leftover molecules, recycling them for another message later. If dopamine stayed in that tiny space too long, the signal would blur, like too many instruments playing at once. The art of communication here is in the timing. Quick hello, a pause, then silence again. This rise and fall, this dance of appearance and disappearance, happens billions of times every second across your brain. Yet somehow, it stays balanced. When you're awake and curious, dopamine pulses more often, keeping your mind alert and your thoughts moving. When you're tired or calm, the flow slows, letting other chemicals take the stage. The harmony between them is what gives your inner world its texture. The rhythm between focus and daydream, effort and ease. It's strange to realize that what we call feeling, the warmth of affection, the spark of interest, even the courage to begin something new, all comes from these microscopic exchanges. A molecule floats across a gap, and somewhere you decide to call a friend or bake bread or start over. The scale is impossible to imagine, and yet it is happening within you at this very moment, quietly, faithfully, beautifully. There are other molecules that join the conversation, of course. Some carry messages of calm or caution, others of excitement or memory. Dopamine doesn't work alone. It sings as part of a choir. But its role is special because it connects emotion to action. It doesn't simply say, "This feels good." It says, "Move toward this." It's the spark between desire and decision, the link between curiosity and effort. In moments of focus, say you're reading a book that truly pulls you in, dopamine is there, whispering encouragement. Each time you turn a page and understand something new, your brain gives a small nod, a pulse of yes, keep going. When you finish, and that quiet sense of satisfaction settles in, dopamine fades back into the shadows, leaving room for the stillness of contentment. But not every signal is about joy. Sometimes dopamine's message is disappointment, a soft drop that says, "That wasn't worth it after all." When you reach for something that once made you happy but doesn't anymore, your brain records that too. The system learns not through commands but through contrast. It's how you eventually learn which pursuits fill you and which ones leave you empty. That's the hidden beauty of this process. Dopamine isn't about constant pleasure, it's about calibration. It helps the brain adjust its expectations, refining its sense of what matters. Each small success, each misstep becomes part of that map. In this way, dopamine is less like a reward button and more like a teacher. It doesn't scold or praise, it simply takes notes. If you imagine all these tiny crossings as threads in a vast web, dopamine is the shimmer that moves along them, connecting one glimmering point to another. When the threads are strong and balanced, your mind feels clear, engaged, curious. When they're tangled, from stress, exhaustion, or overstimulation, the messages become harder to read. Focus fades, restlessness grows, yet even then the web can heal. With rest, sleep, sunlight, and kindness, even the simple act of slowing your breath, the signals begin to align again. It's humbling to think that your identity, your preferences, your sense of what's meaningful, are all built from these chemical stories passed back and forth. You are, in a way, a symphony of invisible messengers, some loud, some faint, all composing the score of your life. And in that symphony, dopamine's note is neither the highest nor the lowest, but it's often the one that catches your attention, the one that says, "There's something worth listening to here." When it fades, the music doesn't stop. It simply changes key, shifting from seeking to resting, from wondering to remembering. If we listen more closely still, another layer of the story begins to form. Because dopamine's journey doesn't end in the brain, it's shaped by the world around you, by what you eat, how you sleep, the light that touches your eyes each morning. The chemistry of curiosity doesn't live in isolation. It flows through a body that listens, adapts, and learns. Our quiet exploration now turns to that connection, how this tiny messenger built inside your cells becomes part of your habits, your loops of craving and reward, and the quiet routines that shape who you are becoming. Curiosity leads us onward, towards something quietly miraculous, how the simple things you eat each day become the very chemistry of your emotions. Every molecule of dopamine in your brain begins its life not as a spark or a thought, but as nourishment. What you feel starts quite literally at your table. You might imagine a breakfast scene, sunlight filtering across a slice of toast, a handful of almonds, the faint scent of coffee rising like warmth. Inside those foods are small building blocks your body collects: proteins, minerals, amino acids. One of those amino acids carries a special talent. It can be transformed step by gentle step into the molecule that helps your mind move: dopamine. Scientists give that starting material a complex name, but you can think of it simply as a seed of curiosity. Your body takes that seed, tends it carefully through invisible chemistry, and grows it into what we call dopamine. The process is so natural, so continuous, that you've been doing it since before you were born, turning nourishment into feeling, into focus, into the rhythm of being awake. The transformation itself is quiet. In certain nerve cells deep inside your brain, these molecular seeds drift into small workshops, tiny spaces where enzymes act like artisans, shaping the raw material into something more alive. At one point, the molecule becomes a soft halfway form, still simple, not yet a messenger, but already humming with potential. Soon after, another gentle change occurs, and suddenly it can speak. It can cross the tiny gap between cells, carrying the news of what matters most. If we translate all this chemistry into something the mind can picture, it's a bit like making tea. You start with water, add leaves, wait for warmth to pull colour and fragrance from what seemed ordinary. When you take that first sip, the flavour feels new, even though every part of it was already there. Water, leaf, heat, time. Dopamine is the same, a familiar ingredient made extraordinary by transformation, and just as tea tastes different depending on how long it steeps or how fresh the leaves are, your dopamine rhythm shifts with how you live. Lack of sleep, irregular meals, stress, and even the colour of light around you can all affect how those molecules are born and how they travel. In the early morning, when sunlight first touches your eyes, a signal moves inward, waking certain cells and asking them to start the day's first flow of dopamine. It's part of what makes mornings feel hopeful, as if life is leaning slightly forward again. As the day continues, that rhythm gently rises and falls. Small peaks when you learn something, laugh, or complete a task. Small valleys when you rest or drift. At night, the system softens, allowing other messengers to take over, the ones that prepare you for sleep and memory. It's a natural duet between motion and stillness. When you ignore that rhythm, too many late nights, too much brightness after dark, too little rest, the harmony falters. You may still make dopamine, but it arrives at the wrong times, scattered instead of flowing. That's why exhaustion can feel like restlessness. Your body is trying to sing, but the timing is off. The good news is that this rhythm can always be retuned. A walk outside in morning light, a balanced meal, even moments of gratitude, all help remind your inner orchestra of its tempo. It's easy to forget how deeply the body and the mind collaborate. We often treat them as separate, one logical, one emotional, but they are parts of a single system. When your body receives good nourishment, calm rest, and steady sunlight, your brain has the materials it needs to build steady focus and warmth of feeling. When those needs are neglected, the rivers we spoke of earlier begin to dry, and the mind looks for quick shortcuts: sugar, scrolling, stimulation. It's not addiction at first. It's simply the brain saying, I'm thirsty. And so, dopamine also becomes a bridge between your physical world and your mental one. A simple meal can feed not only your body, but your curiosity, your capacity to care, your willingness to begin again. Even the comfort of cooking, the rhythm of chopping vegetables, the sound of simmering can stir a sense of calm reward. The anticipation, the smell, the act of tasting, all tiny notes in dopamine's quiet song. When scientists first discovered that dopamine came from what we eat, it blurred the line between biology and emotion. It meant that joy, motivation, even hope were not mysterious gifts but living processes. Fragile, yes, but renewable. You don't need perfection to keep the system alive. You just need rhythm, light and dark, effort and rest, nourishment and pause. You might notice that when life feels steady, when you're eating well, sleeping gently, feeling connected, motivation no longer needs to be forced. You don't need caffeine to start the morning or noise to fill silence. Your mind wakes on its own, curious again, ready for meaning. That's not a miracle. It's the natural balance of chemistry and care. Think of it this way. Every cell in your body is listening. It listens to what you feed it, how you breathe, how kindly you rest. Dopamine is just the messenger, the small voice carrying the report to your mind. We're nourished. We can explore now. Or sometimes, we're tired. Let's slow down. When you learn to hear that voice, you begin to understand yourself in a softer way. Not as a machine to optimize, but as a living pattern to nurture. So the next time you feel that tiny surge of joy at a meal shared with someone, or that warmth that follows laughter, remember that it's more than emotion. It's communication. It's the body and brain speaking the same gentle language, reminding each other that you are whole, that you're cared for, and that even your smallest pleasures are built from ordinary things transformed. And as that idea settles, the story begins to widen again, from the chemistry of nourishment to the habits that these messengers shape over time. Because dopamine doesn't only live in a single moment. It remembers, it builds loops, it teaches the mind to return to what feels rewarding, and sometimes to what simply feels familiar. If we drift a little further into the current, we'll see how those gentle chemical rhythms become patterns, the habits, addictions and rituals that quietly sculpt the way we live. As the night deepens and the currents of the mind settle, our story turns towards something familiar, the quiet patterns that fill our days without asking, the things we reach for without thinking, the loops that repeat themselves long after the first excitement has faded. Habits. Every habit, no matter how ordinary, begins as a conversation between curiosity and reward. The brain notices something, a smell, a sound, a thought, and dopamine lifts its head, alert. It whispers, "This might matter." You respond almost automatically. You act, and if the outcome feels satisfying, the message is stored. That little spark of dopamine marks the memory with a small note. Remember this. It felt good. The next time the same cue appears, the path lights up a little faster. The mind doesn't have to decide. It already knows the way. This is how you learn to reach for your phone when it buzzes, how you crave the smell of coffee before sunrise, how you sigh in relief at the sound of a familiar melody. Each of these patterns is a trail of breadcrumbs that dopamine helped lay down, tiny invisible reminders of where reward once waited. The more you follow the same trail, the clearer it becomes. Over time, what began as exploration turns into routine. You could think of a habit as a small circuit with 4 gentle steps: a cue, a craving, a response, and a reward. The cue is the moment your attention flickers, a light turning on, a notification chime, the rustle of a snack wrapper. The craving is the spark of anticipation, that sense of just one more or I'll check quickly. The response is the action itself, and the reward is the feeling that follows, the brief relief, the small hit of satisfaction. It sounds mechanical, but it's deeply human. These loops are not errors in design, they are how you learn. The same process that can trap you in scrolling or sugar also allows you to practice a skill, build discipline, or create art. Dopamine doesn't care what the loop contains, it only cares that it repeats. It's the pattern, not the content, that the brain loves. At its heart, dopamine is not saying feel good now, it's saying this leads somewhere. When the prediction turns out to be right, when the thing you expected really does feel rewarding, the brain strengthens the connection. When it's wrong, when the result disappoints, the signal fades. It's a gentle form of education, learned through emotion instead of logic. If we imagine the brain as a garden, then dopamine is both the sunlight and the gardener's memory. It shines a little brighter on whatever sprouts curiosity, and next time, it returns there more quickly. The seeds it nurtures most are repetition and attention, and whatever you tend regularly, whether that's gratitude, distraction, focus, or fear, begins to grow. That's why habits can feel like they have lives of their own. Once planted, they continue even when you're not watching. Each repetition builds a path through the forest of your mind, and soon those paths become roads. Some are peaceful and nourishing, like reading before bed or stepping outside to breathe in morning air. Others feel comforting at first but leave you emptier each time, checking a screen one more time, chasing one more quick win. The chemistry behind both is the same. What changes is what you choose to feed. It's tempting to think of this as control, that dopamine is the puppeteer pulling your strings. But that's not quite true. Dopamine doesn't choose for you. It records what you choose often. It's like a scribe taking notes, highlighting what you return to most. Over time, those notes become suggestions. They whisper to you when you least expect it, guiding you gently back toward what you've taught yourself to find rewarding. There's a kindness hidden in this mechanism if you look closely. It means that habits aren't fate, they're memory. And like any memory, they can be rewritten. If you change what you reward, dopamine will follow. It may resist at first, the old trails are still there, but given time, it will draw new lines. That's why change feels awkward before it feels natural. The brain is learning a new rhythm. When you decide to take a break from constant stimulation, to read instead of scroll, to step outside instead of refresh a page, the first moments feel dull, empty. The dopamine system hasn't yet learned to anticipate those new joys, but give it time and something quiet happens. The walk begins to feel peaceful, the page begins to glow, the silence starts to hum with meaning. You've taught dopamine a new path home. Even the smallest rituals, a deep breath before eating, a stretch after work, a moment of gratitude before sleep, can become new cues. Each one tells your brain, this too is reward. Over time, the system adapts. It learns that peace can be as satisfying as pleasure, that stillness can carry its own gentle brightness. If you could listen closely to your neurons while a habit is forming, you'd hear something like a song learning its melody. At first, uncertain notes, then repetition, then fluency. Until finally the tune plays itself as natural as breathing. That's what a habit truly is, a melody you've practiced until it feels like part of you. The wonder is that you can choose new songs. The brain will follow your lead, however slowly. The same chemistry that learns craving can learn calm. The same dopamine that responds to noise can learn to love silence. It's simply waiting for you to show it what matters. So tonight, as you think of your own loops, the small things you return to again and again, try to see them not as flaws, but as footprints. Each one marks a moment when your brain said, this mattered. Some footprints lead toward warmth, others lead in circles. You can pause, look down, and decide where to step next. Dopamine will notice. It always does. As the lights in this imagined garden dim, our path bends toward a deeper truth hiding in this chemistry. that sometimes the wanting itself becomes stronger than the joy it once promised. In certain loops, we chase not satisfaction, but the memory of it. Our next part of the story drifts into that delicate paradox, the strange way the brain can crave even what no longer pleases it. As we drift further into the story, a quiet paradox begins to appear. The very system that helps you learn what feels rewarding can sometimes forget how to feel the reward itself. You may have experienced this before, reaching for your phone without excitement, taking another bite without tasting, opening another tab without interest. The motion is there, the pull is strong, yet the joy feels faint. This is dopamine's curious trick, the separation of wanting from liking. In the beginner, they travel together, the spark of anticipation followed by the warmth of satisfaction. But over time, the anticipation can learn to walk on its own. The brain remembers the approach, not the arrival. Dopamine surges not when you get what you wanted, but when you expect to. It's as if the system becomes fascinated with the chase itself, caring less about the destination. This pattern has deep roots in our biology. Long ago, it kept our ancestors searching for food, shelter, companionship. The ones who were easily satisfied might have stopped too soon, while those who kept seeking survived. In modern life, that same persistence often keeps us trapped in smaller circles, endless scrolling, repetitive work, shopping, refresh, repeat. The drive that once protected us now asks for moderation, not indulgence. Picture a cat chasing a red dot of light. The animal knows somewhere deep down that it will never catch it, but the motion itself feels urgent, irresistible. The eyes track, the muscles tense, the world narrows to a single moving point. That's what dopamine does when craving becomes detached from pleasure. It sharpens focus, energizes the body, but forgets to check if the goal is still meaningful. Scientists once called this the incentive sensitization effect, a technical phrase meaning the wanting grows louder, even as the liking fades. We can translate that more gently. It's when the spark that starts the journey burns brighter than the light waiting at the end. You can feel this when you replay an old song that once thrilled you, but now feels hollow, or when you check a message you didn't really need to check. The brain is chasing a memory, not an experience. It happens because dopamine isn't designed to signal happiness itself. It measures difference, the surprise, the unexpected, the new. Once something becomes predictable, dopamine's attention fades, but the memory of that early excitement lingers. The mind keeps knocking on the same door, hoping the thrill might return. It's not weakness or flaw, it's the echo of learning that once worked too well. This loop can become especially strong when rewards come irregularly, when the brain can't predict if the next outcome will delight or disappoint. That unpredictability amplifies curiosity. Slot machines use it. So do social media feeds, full of small, uncertain rewards, a like, a message, a new image, or nothing at all. Each pull of the lever, each swipe of the thumb whispers maybe this time. Dopamine flares, waiting for a surprise, but whether it comes or not hardly matters. The seeking becomes the habit itself. In your brain, this constant cycle can lower the baseline of contentment. The quiet moments between excitement start to feel flat. You might find yourself seeking stimulation just to feel normal. The pleasure you once found in small things, a walk, a warm meal, the slow rhythm of rain, becomes harder to reach. Yet this is not a broken system. It's simply a tired one. The rivers we spoke of earlier are still flowing. They just need space to clear. Recovery begins not with denial, but with understanding. To step out of the loop, you don't have to stop wanting. You only have to notice what the wanting is for. When you catch yourself reaching for something without true interest, pause and listen to the feeling beneath it. Is it boredom, restlessness, a quiet need for comfort? The act of noticing softens the craving. It reminds dopamine that curiosity was meant to serve meaning, not replace it. You can also teach your brain to rediscover the simple pattern of wanting and liking together. This happens through slower rewards, the kind that take effort, patience, and presence. Cooking a meal from scratch, reading a book without skipping ahead, caring for a plant, writing a letter. These actions unfold gently, rewarding effort as much as completion. With time, your dopamine system begins to relearn that anticipation can end in satisfaction, not just motion. It helps to think of craving as a weather pattern, not a command. It passes. If you watch it instead of obeying it, the sky clears faster. The signal in your brain fades naturally after a few minutes if not reinforced. You can imagine it like a wave that rises and falls. If you resist paddling toward it, it breaks softly on its own. The more often you practice letting the wave pass, the quieter it becomes. Some call this mindfulness, but it's really just the art of remembering that your attention is yours. Dopamine doesn't decide what you value. It only learns from repetition. Every time you choose patience over impulse, you teach it to seek peace instead of noise. It's a slow education, but a gentle one. And when the system calms, something beautiful returns. The ordinary begins to feel extraordinary again. Music regains texture. Food regains flavour. Time stretches instead of collapsing into refresh cycles. You begin to feel the small pulse of satisfaction, not only in having, but in being. This is the state of balance dopamine was always meant to support. Curiosity paired with presence, motivation linked to meaning. So the next time you feel caught between wanting and emptiness, remember, it's not addiction in your soul, it's a pattern in your cells, and patterns can change. Dopamine isn't punishing you, it's waiting for direction. It's the compass, not the captain. The more clearly you set your course toward purpose, calm, gratitude, the more faithfully it will follow. And as that compass steadies, our journey begins to bend toward its natural question. What happens when those patterns grow too strong, when the system becomes overfed with stimulation and the mind forgets how to rest? The story now carries us gently into that crowded, noisy world, the age of overstimulation, where every signal promises joy, and yet so many hearts still feel empty. The path now carries us into a brighter, louder part of the modern story, a world glowing with screens, notifications, and possibilities. Everywhere you look, something asks for your attention. Each sound, each flash of colour, each tiny red circle beside an icon is designed to whisper the same thing: this might matter. And your dopamine system, loyal as ever, listens. It doesn't know that the voice it hears is a machine's design. It only knows that the signal feels urgent. Imagine walking through a city at night, every window flickering with light. One shop promises laughter, another promises admiration, another connection. You know that behind some windows there's real warmth, a conversation, a song, a story. Behind others, just noise. But dopamine can't tell the difference. Its only rule is curiosity. It shines its light wherever novelty glimmers, chasing what's new, not necessarily what's true. This is the paradox of abundance. We live in a world that offers more possible rewards than any brain in history was built to handle. Thousands of small invitations arrive each day. Messages, ads, recommendations, games, feeds, alerts. Each one delivers a tiny burst of possibility. Maybe this will make me laugh. Maybe this will make me feel seen. Maybe this will fill the gap I can't quite name. Each maybe sends a pulse of dopamine forward, marking a moment of attention. One pulse is harmless, but 1,000 in a single day begins to shift the system's balance. Inside your mind, the baseline of dopamine, that steady background hum that once kept you calm and curious, begins to drop. The peaks from constant stimulation rise sharply, but the valleys between them deepen. You start to need more noise to feel the same spark. Silence feels empty. Waiting feels wrong. Stillness begins to ache. It's as though the rivers of dopamine have flooded their banks, leaving the soil too soaked to nourish anything delicate. You can see this pattern almost everywhere. The endless scroll through videos that blur together, the snack you reach for not because you're hungry, but because it's there, the playlist that moves faster than your heartbeat. These are not mistakes or moral failings. They are the natural outcomes of a system that's been taught to expect fireworks at every glance. There's an image that neuroscientists sometimes use, not of circuits or chemicals, but of tuning. Imagine a violin that's been played too loudly, too often. Its strings stretch and lose their tone. At first you might not notice. The music still sounds bright, but gradually the notes begin to sound thin, then sharp, then hollow. No single performance caused it. The constant strain did. That's what overstimulation does to the dopamine system. The instrument still works, but its sensitivity fades. When this happens, pleasure begins to flatten. The things that once brought you quiet joy, reading, resting, simply watching the sky, feel muted. You may even start to confuse excitement with happiness, chasing the quick pulse of novelty because calm feels unfamiliar. Yet the relief that follows is brief, and the cycle repeats. The beautiful thing about this system, though, is that it can recover. The mind is not a static machine. It's a living landscape. When you give it space, the rivers clear. The soil breathes again. The first step is gentle awareness, noticing when you reach for stimulation out of habit, not desire. You don't have to resist harshly. Simply pause. Breathe. Ask quietly, what am I hoping to feel? That question alone begins to reset the rhythm. The next step is what some people call dopamine fasting, though the phrase can sound severe. What it really means is rest, not avoidance, but balance. You can think of it as giving your reward system a moment of quiet so it can hear itself again. That might mean turning off notifications for a day, leaving the phone in another room while you eat, or simply walking without headphones for a few minutes. The goal isn't to remove pleasure, it's to make space for it to return in its natural rhythm. When you step back from constant stimulation, the first thing you feel is often discomfort. The mind, used to noise, fidgets in the silence, but after a while, sometimes hours, sometimes days, a softer clarity begins to appear. Colours seem richer. Time slows. The simplest things, the smell of rain, the texture of paper, the sound of your own breath, start to sparkle again. This is the baseline rising back into balance. Dopamine hasn't vanished, it's just remembering how to listen. Nature is particularly good at this recalibration. The slow rhythm of waves, the unpredictable song of birds, the changing light of the sky, all of it retrains your mind to expect beauty that unfolds slowly, not in bursts. Even tending a small plant can remind your nervous system of time's natural pace, effort, patience, reward. What you're really doing in these moments is rebuilding sensitivity. You're teaching the brain that quiet joy counts as reward too, that not every maybe needs to be answered, and that satisfaction can grow gently without drama. Over time, the overstimulated system finds its equilibrium again. Focus returns. Motivation feels cleaner, less frantic. Pleasure becomes steady instead of sharp. Think of this process as learning to taste again after eating too much sugar. At first, everything else seems bland. But then, one day, you notice the sweetness of an apple, the depth of plain tea, the calm of a slow afternoon. You haven't lost the capacity for pleasure. It's been waiting underneath the noise all along. And so, the antidote to the overfed circuit isn't deprivation. It's nourishment of a different kind. Meaningful conversation instead of constant chatter. deep rest instead of endless scrolling. The world doesn't stop being loud, but you begin to hear your own signal within it again, the quiet rhythm of curiosity that feels like peace. From here, our journey begins to turn gently toward balance, the art of keeping dopamine's flow steady without letting it flood or fade. Because even the most beautiful chemistry needs harmony, and balance, as it turns out, is where real happiness learns to breathe. As we follow the river onward, the light changes. The journey that began with curiosity and reward now reaches the quiet space of balance, the place between too much and too little. For dopamine, as for all living things, balance is where truth lives. You might imagine dopamine as a musician tuning an instrument. When the strings are too tight, the notes are sharp, restless, and loud. When they're too loose, the melody drifts dull and slow. Only when the tension is just right does the music sound whole. In your brain, this balance is constantly shifting, sometimes bright with energy and motivation, sometimes dim with stillness. Too much dopamine doesn't make you happier. Too little doesn't make you calm. Both extremes are simply different rhythms of the same song. We usually think of happiness as a surge, a peak, a rush of feeling. But the mind isn't built for endless peaks. It needs valleys too, quiet stretches where it can catch its breath. When dopamine rises sharply and too often, excitement turns into restlessness. When it sinks too low for too long, stillness turns into emptiness. The mind, like an orchestra, needs both melody and silence to make meaning. You can feel this in the rhythm of everyday life. Think of the restless buzz that follows success, the strange sense of, was that all? Right after reaching a long-awaited goal. In that moment, dopamine falls sharply, and the brain feels the absence like a small echo. It's the same after a big celebration, or after finishing a project you've lived inside for months. The silence that follows can feel heavier than expected. The system has played its highest note and suddenly finds itself in quiet. That emptiness isn't failure, it's the mind catching up. It's the pause between movements in a symphony. The same happens after long stretches of stimulation, after weeks of rushing, scrolling, consuming. The baseline of dopamine slowly lowers, like a tide pulling away from shore. Ordinary life feels grey, even rest feels restless. This state has a name in science, but you don't need it to know the feeling. Waking up and not wanting anything, even the things you usually love. The energy to seek, to care, to begin. All of it goes quiet. It's not sadness exactly, it's the absence of colour. The world is there, but dimmed. This state is called anhedonia, a word that sounds heavy but simply means without joy. It can arrive after burnout, stress or loss, when the dopamine system has been overworked. It's not a verdict on who you are, it's a signal that the instrument needs rest. Just as muscles tire after a long run, your motivation circuitry needs recovery after prolonged excitement. On the other side of the spectrum lies overstimulation, when dopamine flows too easily, lighting up every small possibility with urgency. It can feel like endless motion. Plans, projects, impulses, ideas that multiply faster than you can hold them. In small doses, this spark fuels creativity and courage. But when it burns too hot, it becomes exhausting, a mind full of light but with nowhere to land. Anxiety often grows here, in this overcrowded orchestra where every instrument plays at once. Some people spend their lives moving between these poles, high bursts of inspiration followed by long winters of emptiness. The system learns to overreach and then collapse. Yet the beauty of the brain lies in its ability to retune. Balance is not a fixed state. It's a rhythm you can return to. You've felt it before, in moments when effort and ease feel equal, when you're focused but not frantic, calm but not dull. It might happen while painting, cooking, hiking, or even tidying a room. In those moments, dopamine finds its middle ground, The music of the mind hums evenly without demand. Happiness, then, isn't about chasing higher peaks. It's about keeping rhythm. Too much excitement without rest feels like shouting into wind. Too much calm without curiosity becomes numbness. What we call joy might simply be the moment both are in harmony, the point where the system moves effortlessly between anticipation and contentment. To find this rhythm again, the body offers its own quiet cues. Sleep, sunlight, nourishment and stillness are not luxuries. They are the tuning tools. Without them, the music distorts. Sleep resets dopamine receptors, those tiny gates that decide how loudly the signal plays. Light in the morning tells the brain, begin again. Movement lets dopamine spread evenly through the body, like warming the strings before performance. Each of these acts, rest, light, motion, is the brain's way of remembering its melody. You can feel balance returning in small ways. Laughter that doesn't need a reason. Concentration that comes without force. A peaceful hunger to create again. That's dopamine's quiet harmony, restored. It's not euphoria, it's ease. When we understand this, the chase for constant excitement begins to soften. We realize that the goal was never to stay on the mountaintop. It was to learn how to climb and descend with grace, to enjoy the view and then rest in the valley without fear of losing it. Dopamine doesn't reward the loudest moments of your life. It rewards the meaningful ones. It measures not intensity, but balance, the steady alternation between seeking and savouring, effort and peace. In that sense, happiness is less like a firework and more like the flicker of a candle, steady, quiet, warm and alive. And as the flame steadies, our path gently widens. Because balance is not only a state of mind, it's also a dance of the body. The chemistry of motion, emotion and perception are all intertwined, each depending on dopamine's rhythm. To understand balance fully, we have to look at what happens when the music falters, when the body itself forgets the tune. The path now carries us toward the body itself, the quiet stage on which dopamine performs its most delicate dance. Up to now, we've spoken about motivation, curiosity and emotion, but beneath those feelings lie muscles, nerves and rhythm. The chemistry that helps you feel inspired is the same one that helps you lift a cup, walk across a room, or steady your breath. In this deeper layer, dopamine is not only the voice of joy, it's the rhythm of motion. You might picture the body as an orchestra and dopamine as the conductor's hand. It doesn't play any note itself, but without it, the instruments fall out of sync. A simple movement, like reaching to turn off a light or tying your shoes, begins as a small spark deep inside the brain. That spark travels through thin, branching pathways, carrying the message, let's move. When dopamine flows properly, each signal arrives right on time. Fingers flex, muscles follow, motion feels natural. You don't even have to think about it. But if the conductor's hand grows tired or trembles, the music falters. The first signs are subtle, a slowness in gesture, a stiffness in the small things. Over time, that slowness deepens. This is what happens in Parkinson's disease, a condition where the cells that release dopamine in the part of the brain that controls movement begin to fade. They don't disappear all at once, they simply grow quiet, like instruments lowering their sound one by one. The result isn't pain, but pause. The body's rhythm becoming hesitant, the mind willing, but the movement slow. It's a humbling reminder that joy and motion share the same thread. The dopamine that once sparked excitement for a new idea also guides the lift of a hand or the curve of a smile. When it ebbs, both energy and movement can fade together. Treatments for Parkinson's work by feeding those silent pathways, coaxing them back to life with chemical substitutes that can act in dopamine's place. It doesn't restore what's lost, but it reminds the system of its tempo, helping the dance continue a little longer. On the opposite side of the balance lies another kind of dissonance, when dopamine signals become too loud, too eager, too many at once. In that state, the brain begins to lose distinction between what is real and what is imagined. Thoughts accelerate, connections multiply, patterns appear where none exist. This is one of the ways schizophrenia reveals itself, not as madness, but as a flood of meaning. The dopamine system, normally selective in what it marks as important, starts underlining everything. Every sound, every shadow, every glance feels charged with purpose. The world becomes overlit and the mind overwhelmed. Here too, medicine steps in, not to silence dopamine completely, but to turn the volume knob gently downward. These treatments don't erase imagination or awareness. They simply quiet the storm so that thought can find its footing again. The balance is delicate. Too little signal and life flattens. Too much, and it bursts into confusion. The body, the mind, and the chemistry that connects them must constantly negotiate peace. We rarely think about how much of our identity depends on this negotiation. The feeling of control when you write your name, the ease of standing upright, the ability to trust what your senses tell you, all rely on dopamine finding its proper rhythm. When that rhythm falters, reality itself can feel uneven. And yet, even in these fragile states, the human spirit adapts. People living with such conditions often describe moments of extraordinary clarity, creativity, or grace. The body might falter, but meaning continues to move through them like music remembered by heart. It's tempting to think of dopamine purely as chemical precision, but it's also deeply poetic. In each of us, it shapes how movement becomes expression. The dancer's poise, the writer's flow, the speaker's cadence, the artisan's steady hand. Every gesture that carries beauty owes something to its quiet choreography. When we see that movement lost in trembling hands or frozen steps, what we truly mourn is not just ability but rhythm, the deep inner beat that connects us to the world. Still, the story is not one of loss alone. Modern medicine has learned to speak gently to dopamine's system to help restore its conversation. Exercise, music, even laughter can nudge it toward balance. A walk in sunlight sends ripples through those same pathways, waking them like a soft rehearsal. Each step, each breath, tells the brain we're still moving. It's why dance therapy, rhythm and song can bring light to those with Parkinson's. Not because they cure, but because they remind. Even for those untouched by illness, dopamine's delicate balance can teach humility. It reminds us that every small grace, every fluid gesture, every stable mood is a miracle of coordination. The mind and body are not separate performers, they're partners in a shared waltz. The chemistry that lets us dream is the same chemistry that lets us lift a spoon. Perhaps the most human truth in all of this is that balance never stays fixed. It's a living dance, the body adjusting, the mind listening, the molecule flowing, and though science can describe the steps, it cannot measure the meaning. That belongs to experience, to the quiet awe of being able to move, to think, to exist. If we follow the rhythm a little further, we find that balance doesn't only come from medicine or motion, it also grows from rest, from the soft tuning of daily life that keeps dopamine steady. The act of waking with the sun, of sleeping deeply, of completing small tasks with care. These are the natural musicians of your chemistry. Our next part of the story drifts toward them, the simple rituals and gentle pauses that remind the brain how to hum in tune again. As night folds deeper and the noise of the day begins to settle, the mind too begins its own quiet repair. Every moment you rest, even before sleep arrives, your body is already retuning its inner instruments. This is the part of dopamine's story that most people never notice. The way it steps back, listens to its own echoes, and adjusts. Balance is not a fixed achievement. It's a breathing rhythm, a cycle that resets itself again and again through the simple rituals of living. Think of your mind as a small workshop that never fully closes. During the day, it hums with production, new signals, new ideas, new sparks of motion. At night, the workers sweep the floors, organize the tools, and make space for the next morning. Dopamine is one of those workers. It checks the circuits of motivation, tests the wires of reward, quiets the systems that have been overused. As you sleep, it helps decide which memories to keep and which to release, which desires to strengthen and which to let fade. The morning that follows is not simply new because the sun has risen. It's new because your chemistry has found its rhythm again. This rhythm is gentle but powerful. It can be disturbed by many small things: missed sleep, skipped meals, endless screens, and restored by equally simple gestures. Sunlight, for example, is more than warmth or brightness. It's a signal. When light touches your eyes after waking, it tells your brain, begin the cycle again. A quiet conversation between cells unfolds. The brain adjusts its clocks, hormones shift, dopamine begins its daily rise. This is why mornings feel like beginnings, not just for the day, but for the mind's curiosity itself. By evening, the signal softens and other messengers take the stage, the ones that guide you towards stillness, reflection, and rest. The falling of dopamine's tide is not a loss, it's an invitation. The system cannot hum all the time. It needs silence between the notes. That silence is what gives music meaning. When dopamine's rhythm is steady, life feels quietly purposeful. Effort feels natural. Small joys appear without needing to be chased. But when that rhythm becomes uneven, too many peaks, too few valleys, even the simplest tasks can feel like climbing uphill. In those times, the mind begins to crave stimulation as a substitute for balance. Sugar, noise, busyness. Yet what it really needs is pause. Pausing doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing something slowly enough to notice. A walk without destination. Folding laundry with care. Washing your hands in warm water and feeling the weight of the day slide away. Each of these moments tells the nervous system, you're safe, you can rest. And when the body believes that message, dopamine levels settle naturally, like a tide finding its shore. Scientists sometimes speak of homeostasis, a word that sounds mechanical, but really means harmony. It's the body's way of returning to equilibrium after every wave of experience. You can think of it as breathing in slow motion. Every surge of energy needs an exhale, every burst of excitement a rest. Without that return, the baseline, your normal state of calm motivation, begins to drop. When you restore it, the world brightens again in subtle ways. Gratitude is another quiet tuner. When you take a moment to recognize something good, not with dramatic joy, but with quiet awareness, the brain marks it gently, storing it as reward. It's the smallest of dopamine signals, yet it ripples widely. Over time, this practice rewires the mind to find contentment, not in novelty, but in appreciation. You begin to feel rewarded simply for being present. Completion, too, is part of this repair. The small act of finishing something, making the bed, answering a letter, tending a plant, tells the dopamine system that effort leads to peace. It's not the grand successes that matter most. It's the steady rhythm of beginnings and endings, actions and rest. Each completion closes a loop, freeing attention for what's next. Even nature itself seems built for this balance. Watch how sunlight filters through clouds, how waves rise and fall, how birds call and then pause to listen. The world doesn't rush to stay in motion. It breathes. You're made of the same pattern. Dopamine follows those cycles, surging when the world invites action, fading when it's time to reflect. In learning to trust that ebb and flow, you begin to live in harmony with your own design. You might think of dopamine not as something to manage, but to accompany. It is a traveller, not a master. It wants to move, to rest, to move again. Your job is to offer it rhythm, to give it days with effort and nights with calm, mornings with curiosity and evenings with gratitude. In that balance, the system doesn't need to be controlled. It begins to guide you softly toward what is sustainable, what feels true. In a sense, balance is not about perfection, but forgiveness. When the mind has been too active, forgive it with rest. When it has been too quiet, forgive it with movement. Each day is a new rehearsal for harmony. And when that harmony returns, you can feel it in the simplest ways. The first sip of tea, tasting alive, the focus that comes without strain, the sense that being here is enough. Those are signs that your dopamine has found its center again. So tonight, as your thoughts slow and your breath deepens, imagine your inner orchestra tuning one last time before sleep. The flutes of curiosity, the strings of effort, the drums of motion, all softening, aligning, readying for the next dawn. The system doesn't need silence, it needs music with pauses. And those pauses are where restoration lives. From this quiet understanding, our journey will open into new ground, into how the very tendency to seek, to explore, to wonder, is not learned, but born within us. The next light we follow rises from childhood curiosity, from genes that hum with adventure, and from the body's secret conversations that guide every feeling you've ever known. As dawn begins to rise over the edges of this story, our attention turns to the earliest rhythms of curiosity itself, to the way the drive to explore begins not in thought, but in birth. Before words, before plans, before even memory, there is already motion. You were born with a mind that leans forward, a mind that reaches. From the first days of life, dopamine hums softly through your nervous system, helping you learn the world by touch, sound, and taste. Every time an infant kicks their legs, reaches toward light, or watches a parent's face, the tiny circuits of dopamine light up, recording that the world is worth noticing. Curiosity isn't a learned behaviour, it's the first language your brain ever spoke, the way it says, "Stay awake to this." In those early months, every discovery feels enormous. The crinkle of paper, the shape of a shadow, the warmth of a familiar voice, all become signals for the brain to remember. Each spark of interest releases a shimmer of dopamine, reinforcing that life responds to effort. These are the earliest lessons of motivation. When I reach, something happens. When I cry, someone comes. When I smile, someone smiles back. It's not about logic or strategy, it's chemistry teaching trust. As a child grows, the brain begins to weave patterns from these lessons. The small signals of dopamine guide exploration, crawl, grasp, babble, laugh. The brain rewards every successful encounter with the world, shaping behaviour long before reasoning arrives. This is why childhood can feel boundless, why every stick becomes a sword, every rock a planet. The dopamine system is in its purest form then, hungry for novelty, generous with wonder. By adolescence, the system changes again. The dopamine circuits expand and become more sensitive, like speakers turn to a higher volume. Everything feels brighter, louder, riskier. Teenagers are often accused of recklessness, but it's not rebellion alone. It's biology's way of urging exploration. Evolution favoured those who dared to leave the safety of the firelight, who tested boundaries, who searched for new paths. Dopamine fuels that courage. In the teenage brain, rewards feel stronger and disappointments sharper. That's why first loves, first losses, and first dreams leave such deep impressions. The chemistry of those moments burns its memory into the heart. Each surge of dopamine during adolescence helps carve emotional depth, helping a person learn not just what they want, but why. This heightened sensitivity can feel overwhelming. A song that makes an adult smile might move a teenager to tears. A small success can feel like triumph, a small failure like despair. Yet it's this intensity that teaches empathy, passion, and identity. The brain, flooded with dopamine, is mapping what it means to live fully, the joy of risk, the weight of consequence. Some of this exploration is written even deeper, into the tiny variations of our genetic code. Inside every cell lies a set of instructions, not commands, but tendencies. Some of those tendencies make a person more drawn to novelty, others to routine. Scientists have found small genetic differences that seem to shape this, what some call the adventure gene. But rather than thinking of it as destiny, imagine it as a whisper in your design. For some it says discover, for others build. Both are forms of curiosity, expressed in different tempos. The point isn't which one you have, it's that life itself depends on both, the explorers who reach for what's beyond and the caretakers who perfect what's within. Dopamine is the bridge between these two instincts. In one person, it pulls them toward the unknown. In another, it rewards them for returning home. As adults, we often forget that this seeking impulse was once effortless. We replace wonder with efficiency, curiosity with caution. But the circuitry remains. The same molecules that guided your first steps are still alive inside you, waiting to notice, waiting to be fed by novelty and gentle challenge. Every time you learn something new, feel awe, or try again after failure, you awaken that ancient system. Sometimes you can feel it. That light, almost childlike spark when something captures your attention fully. The way a new sound, a new idea, or even a change in weather can stir a sense of possibility. That's dopamine saying, you still remember how to explore. To nurture this part of yourself, you don't have to chase extremes. Curiosity doesn't mean cliff jumping or endless novelty. It can mean standing still and seeing something familiar as if for the first time. The texture of tree bark, the pattern of your own breath, the rhythm of footsteps on pavement. The same chemistry that drives exploration can also fuel mindfulness, turning attention itself into adventure. And though our paths diverge, some people crave change, others stability. Every life contains both forces. There are moments for seeking and moments for keeping. Dopamine weaves between them like a thread, connecting the pulse of excitement to the quiet satisfaction of belonging. In this way, our biology mirrors the arc of life itself. Youth is the season of expansion, adulthood the season of refinement. Both depend on the same current flowing differently. Bold and bright when we're learning, soft and steady when we're tending what we've learned. Even in age, curiosity doesn't die. It transforms into reflection, a gentler dopamine rhythm that rewards understanding rather than discovery. You could say that being human is to live in a constant dialogue with curiosity, to spend a lifetime translating the spark of what's out there into the peace of I've found enough. Dopamine is that translator. It reminds us that we are meant not only to move, but to wonder, to grow, to reach. And as this understanding settles, another voice within the body begins to whisper, one that lives even deeper than the brain, in the soft labyrinth of the gut. Because the story of dopamine doesn't end at the skull. It continues in the hidden chemistry that connects thought to digestion, emotion to nourishment, intuition to balance. Our next step in this journey turns gently downward into the second brain that listens quietly beneath your ribs, the gut that feels. Our quiet exploration now turns inward, past the boundaries of thought and into the body's hidden depths. Beneath your ribs, behind the slow rise and fall of your breath, lives a second network of awareness, a web of nerves so vast and sensitive that scientists once nicknamed it the second brain. You might call it something simpler, your gut. For centuries, people have felt that this part of the body carried its own kind of wisdom. We speak of having a gut feeling, of butterflies in the stomach, of something that makes you sick, not because of what you eat, but because of what you feel. Long before modern science could explain it, the body already knew. Emotion is not only in the mind, it is written through the whole of you. Inside your gut, there are more nerve cells than in the entire spinal cord. They form loops of communication that run upward toward the brain. Tiny pulses of information moving through the vagus nerve, a long shimmering thread that connects the chest, the heart, and the head. Every heartbeat, every meal, every moment of stress sends signals through this channel, adjusting chemistry and mood in both directions. Among these signals, dopamine hums quietly. Most people imagine it as a product of the brain alone, but much of it is actually produced in the gut. Millions of tiny organisms, your gut bacteria, help shape how this chemistry flows. They are like unseen artisans, blending nutrients, crafting molecules, and sending whispers of information to the nervous system. Some of these messages travel directly. Others tell the brain how to feel through hormones, immune cells, or changes in appetite. You might think of your gut as an orchestra with many instruments, each one playing a different rhythm. The bacteria are the percussionists setting the beat. Your intestines carry the melody. The brain listens and adjusts its harmony. When the performance is balanced, you feel grounded, appetite steady, energy calm, mood clear. When it's off key, everything feels slightly wrong. Meals unsettle, thoughts race, sleep falters. It's not just in your head. It's in the dialogue between head and heart and stomach, a trio that never stops conversing. This is why stress can twist your stomach, or why comfort food can quiet the mind. The nervous system in your gut responds to emotion almost instantly. When the brain senses threat, the gut tightens, redirecting energy away from digestion toward alertness. When peace returns, the gut relaxes, and you feel warmth spreading again. These are not coincidences. They are the echoes of ancient survival systems, reminders that mind and body evolved as one. The small creatures living inside you, those countless bacteria, also sense your emotional climate. When you're under chronic stress, their community changes. The helpful strains that produce calming signals diminish, while others flourish in the storm. The balance between them shifts the way your body makes dopamine and serotonin, altering your mood from within. Yet the opposite is also true. When you eat slowly, breathe deeply, or spend time in nature, you create conditions for harmony. The bacteria respond with quiet gratitude, releasing chemicals that calm inflammation and restore gentle curiosity. It's humbling to realize that your sense of motivation or peace may begin not with a thought, but with the health of a microcosm inside you. You are, in a way, a city of living beings, all cooperating to keep the lights of awareness glowing. When the city thrives, the music of dopamine is steady. When it suffers, the rhythm falters. There's poetry in the way food becomes feeling. The nutrients from a single meal can travel into the bloodstream, cross into the brain, and change the tone of your emotions hours later. You may not sense it directly, but the body remembers. A meal rich in variety, colour, and care brings calm to the gut and clarity to the mind. A hurried meal, eaten under tension, tells the body that the world is uncertain, and the chemistry follows suit. This is why rituals around food, sharing a meal, giving thanks, cooking slowly, matter more than we realise. They are not just culture, they are chemistry written into tradition. Every culture has its quiet ways of signalling safety to the body before eating, lighting a candle, saying a prayer, washing hands, taking a breath. These acts tell the gut, you're safe now, you can receive. The dopamine system listens too, marking the moment as a small reward. Over time, these rituals become a kind of emotional digestion, allowing not just food but experience to settle gently within you. When sadness or anxiety makes you lose appetite, it's not betrayal, it's coherence. The body is simply redirecting energy inward, trying to restore equilibrium, and when healing begins, hunger returns like spring after winter. It's one of the simplest signs that the inner conversation has found its rhythm again. In recent years, science has begun to rediscover what the poets and healers already knew. The gut is not a passive organ, but a living partner in emotion. The same molecule that helps your brain anticipate joy also helps your stomach decide when to open, when to rest, and when to trust. The connection is not metaphorical, it's real. And understanding it may be one of the most profound ways to care for both mind and body. To listen to your gut, then, is not superstition. It's communication. It's the act of hearing what your inner landscape is trying to tell you through subtle sensations, the flutter of nerves before a decision, the knot that warns you of tension, the warmth that signals peace. Each is a message, written in the same language as dopamine, a language that speaks not in words, but in rhythms and waves. So tonight, as you breathe, you might place a hand over your stomach and notice its quiet motion. Beneath that rise and fall, there is a world of listening, millions of lives in gentle service, translating nourishment into awareness. You're not a single creature, you're a collaboration. And as this awareness settles, the story naturally turns upward again, from the chemistry of the gut to the lessons of the mind. Because dopamine's role in curiosity and learning is not only to feed the body, but to feed the mind's sense of discovery. The same system that digests experience will soon show us how it learns, how it predicts joy and disappointment, and how it turns surprise into meaning. From here, the story opens into one of the brain's most elegant tricks, its ability to predict the future. Not in grand, mystical ways, but in the small, constant rhythm of expectation. Your mind is always guessing what will happen next. The taste of your morning tea, the warmth of a handshake, the sound that follows when you press a key. Dopamine is the quiet mathematician behind those guesses, the signal that measures the distance between what is expected and what arrives. You could imagine it as a gentle game played between neurons. Each time the brain anticipates a reward and gets it right, dopamine nods approvingly. Yes, as predicted. But when something turns out better than expected, when a new tea tastes richer than you imagined, when a stranger's kindness surprises you, dopamine lights up like a smile spreading through the mind. The signal rises, marking the event as special. The brain learns, do this again. This small difference between what you expected and what happened is the heart of how the brain learns. Scientists once called it the reward prediction error, but it might be easier to think of it as the joy of surprise. It's not the absolute size of the reward that matters, it's how it compares to what came before. In that sense, happiness is often not about what we have, but what we didn't expect to have. Imagine waiting for a friend who arrives late. Each minute stretches. Then, just as you're about to leave, they appear with your favourite pastry in hand. The joy you feel in that moment isn't just from the pastry, it's from the correction of expectation. The brain had drifted toward disappointment, and dopamine restores balance with a rush of delight. The same process works in reverse. If something you hoped for falls short, a meal that looks beautiful but tastes dull, a long-awaited trip that feels somehow ordinary, dopamine dips slightly. It's not punishment, just recalibration. The system whispers, next time, adjust your hope. This quiet correction keeps your curiosity realistic, helping you navigate a world where not every promise shines the same way. In this way, dopamine becomes the teacher of attention. It guides you toward what feels meaningful and gently away from what doesn't. It tells the mind where to look next. Over time, those lessons shape not just learning but personality. The things you find beautiful, the challenges you enjoy, the stories you tell yourself, all are traces of this guessing game, written into the folds of your memory. The pattern extends into creativity too. Artists, scientists, and musicians all live in a delicate dialogue with dopamine, the excitement of new ideas balanced by the satisfaction of completing them. When the mind catches a novel connection, dopamine flares, rewarding the insight. Then comes the work of shaping that spark into form, a slower rhythm that deepens the reward. It's why creativity often feels like alternating waves of discovery and calm, the brain playing its own internal game of surprise and resolution. Even everyday curiosity follows the same rule. You might notice how a mystery in a book keeps you turning pages, or how a puzzle draws you back each time you think you've solved it. It's the uncertainty that engages the dopamine system. Complete predictability bores the mind, complete chaos overwhelms it. The sweet spot lies somewhere in between, just enough unknown to keep the story alive. You can feel this in your daily life, often without realizing it. The rhythm of morning routines, the pleasure of small variations, a new route to work, a different breakfast, a conversation with a stranger. Each small novelty invites dopamine to play. It's not about excitement, but freshness, a reminder that life can still surprise you. But the guessing game can also become exhausting when every moment demands attention. In the modern world, the number of surprises has multiplied beyond what the system was built for. Notifications, news flashes, advertisements, each one claiming to be unexpected. When everything's a surprise, nothing feels special. The prediction system loses contrast. The brain stops learning because there is too much to learn at once. That's why calm and repetition are not the enemies of joy, they're its foundation. Familiar patterns give the mind space to notice true novelty. When you slow down enough to let expectation build naturally, even a small surprise feels luminous. The smell of rain after heat, a kind word at the end of a long day, the quiet realization that you are still here. The simplest events glow brighter against the background of stillness. In that sense, dopamine doesn't just create motivation, it creates meaning. It gives texture to time. Without it, every moment would feel the same, flat and featureless. With it, the world ripples between hope and discovery, disappointment and delight, the emotional topography that makes life recognizable. What's most extraordinary is how forgiving this system is. No matter how many times your expectations are misplaced or your curiosity tired, it keeps learning. It never stops playing the guessing game. Each new morning resets the balance sheet. A single, unexpected joy can lift the whole map of meaning again. So, when you notice that familiar pulse of anticipation, the little flicker that says something good might happen, you're feeling the same chemistry that taught your ancestors to look beyond the horizon. It's the whisper that turned survival into art, instinct into imagination. And as we follow that whisper a little deeper, we find that learning isn't just about the outer world. It's also how the mind learns to care. Dopamine not only helps you predict what brings reward, it helps you attach emotion to it, weaving curiosity into value, repetition into identity. Our next quiet step explores that tender transformation, how the brain turns fleeting interest into the lasting warmth of devotion. Our quiet journey now moves toward a gentler truth. Dopamine doesn't only teach your brain what to seek, it slowly teaches it what to love. Through the long practice of curiosity and reward, your mind learns to care. Every time you find joy in something, even something small, the lesson is written softly across the web of neurons. This matters. It begins with attention. The brain marks what you notice. If you linger on a sound, a face, a feeling, dopamine quietly amplifies that focus. It tells the mind, keep this one. You might think of it as highlighting lines in a book. Over time, the highlighted passages start to form a theme, the story of what you value. That story becomes the shape of your identity. Each curiosity that you follow leaves a faint glow in your mind, a melody you learn to play, a recipe you repeat, a person whose laughter feels like home. None of these moments are random. They are dopamine signatures slowly weaving into meaning. Every repetition strengthens the signal until it becomes part of who you are. You care because you've practiced caring. This process of repetition and reward forms the foundation of all learning. When you first learn something new, dopamine pulses each time you make progress. It's that small lift you feel when a puzzle piece fits, when a word in another language finally makes sense, when a pattern suddenly clicks. The molecule doesn't reward perfection, it rewards improvement. It marks the path, not the destination. That's why progress feels satisfying even before mastery arrives. In schools, in art, in relationships, this pattern repeats endlessly. Effort creates small surges of dopamine that reinforce endurance. It's the chemistry behind practice, patience, and grit. When teachers or mentors talk about intrinsic motivation, this is what they mean. The natural pleasure that comes from small steps, from watching skill grow under your hands. But dopamine also works in subtler ways, helping your brain connect learning to emotion. When something carries personal meaning, when you feel moved or inspired, the signal grows stronger. The mind learns more deeply when it cares. That's why you can forget entire pages of a textbook, but remember the song that played while you first fell in love. Emotion sharpens attention, and attention is the soil where learning grows. Artists often describe this as being in flow, that gentle immersion where effort disappears and time feels suspended. In this state, dopamine pulses in steady rhythm, not in spikes. The brain becomes fully engaged, not chasing reward but resting inside it. You feel both calm and alive. Every stroke of paint, every line of code, every note played feels self-rewarding. The system has learned to care about the act itself, not just the outcome. It's a lesson that applies far beyond art. A gardener tending a patch of earth, a child building with blocks, a scientist lost in wonder over a question. Each is experiencing the same quiet alignment. This is dopamine at peace, curiosity without urgency, care without demand. When the mind reaches this state often enough, it begins to seek it naturally. It has learned that steady engagement feels better than constant novelty. You can feel this shift inside yourself. At first, learning or working might feel like effort, something to push through. But after a while, repetition becomes rhythm. You start to look forward to it. That's the moment dopamine has changed its focus, from chasing external reward to celebrating internal coherence. The system realizes that meaning itself is the most sustainable source of pleasure. Every culture in its own way has understood this. Rituals, crafts, and daily practices all serve the same function. They give dopamine something steady to hold on to. When you knead bread, string beads, paint, pray, or hum the same tune each day, your mind learns patience through rhythm. It discovers joy in repetition, turning habit into harmony. That's why mindfulness isn't about silence, it's about steady attention. Each slow breath is a reminder that even the smallest act, done with care, can teach the brain to rest inside meaning. There's a kind of love that grows from this, not the fiery surge of excitement, but the quiet devotion of focus. The love a craftsman feels for their tools, the affection a teacher has for their subject, the tenderness you feel when you care for something fragile. Dopamine keeps this devotion alive, not by shouting, but by whispering, "Stay here, this matters." In relationships, this same mechanism builds attachment. The small rituals of connection, shared meals, repeated jokes, gentle touches, reinforce the feeling of safety. Each positive interaction sends a faint pulse of dopamine, writing comfort into memory. Over time, the mind begins to associate presence with peace. You start to care not just because of pleasure, but because of belonging. And when loss comes, as it always does, that same system aches. The absence of familiar reward feels like silence where music once played. Yet even then, the chemistry learns, it reshapes, seeking new balance, new meaning. It doesn't erase what was learned, it integrates it, transforming grief into empathy. Even in sorrow, dopamine continues to teach the brain to care, just differently. The idea that we can train what we love might sound mechanical, but it's deeply human. The mind is always sculpting itself from the materials of attention. Whatever you return to, you become fluent in, and whatever you practice, compassion, patience, curiosity, eventually becomes instinct. So the next time you find yourself absorbed in something quiet, something ordinary yet peaceful, know that your brain is listening. Every moment of sincere attention is a small lesson in devotion. You're shaping your chemistry toward care, and as we rest in that realization, our journey begins to widen again. The story of dopamine isn't just personal, it stretches back through time, through myth, history, and culture. For thousands of years, humanity has tried to describe this same pulse in poetry and philosophy, calling it by many names: desire, will, eros, tanha, chi. Each tradition touched a part of the same mystery, the longing that moves all living things. Our next step in this exploration drifts softly into that shared story, tracing how ancient thinkers, artists, and scientists tried to understand the force that makes life reach forward, the universal hunger to feel alive. Our quiet trail now bends backward through time, to an age before laboratories, before microscopes, before we knew the word dopamine, and yet the longing it represents was already there, written in myth and prayer, in poetry and philosophy. The ancients didn't call it chemistry, they called it eros, tanha, chi, karma, or sometimes just the hunger to live. Every culture found its own language for the invisible current that moved people to act, to love, to seek. In Greece, Eros was not only the god of desire, but also the spirit of creation, the force that drew chaos into order, stars into shape, hearts toward one another. In India, tanha meant craving, the root of both suffering and growth, the pull that binds us to life and teaches us its lessons. In China, qi was life's circulating breath, the invisible energy that made a body more than matter. All were stories about movement and meaning, each describing the same pulse that today we trace through neural pathways. It's almost funny in a gentle way how myth and neuroscience are two sides of the same coin. The myths gave dopamine a personality, a god who teased and tormented, offering pleasure with one hand and restlessness with the other. Science gave the god a name that fits in a lab notebook, but the behaviour didn't change much. The same spark that made the Greeks sing hymns to longing still drives us to check messages at midnight. If we could speak to those ancient poets, perhaps they'd smile at our diagrams and say, "Ah, so you've met. Him too." They might tell us that understanding the molecule doesn't mean escaping it. After all, every story of Eros ends in both joy and complication. Desire lifts us and humbles us. It builds civilizations and breaks hearts. The same energy that built temples also started wars. Today it builds skyscrapers, art and algorithms. The temples just look different. You might picture a philosopher in candlelight, wondering why wanting never ends. The wine is sweet, the laughter warm, yet the mind still leans forward, restless. Why does satisfaction fade so quickly, they ask. We could answer now with talk of dopamine receptors and adaptation. But the philosopher's question wasn't about science, it was about the human condition. And even with all our discoveries, the question remains, why does having never quiet wanting? Somewhere in those ancient reflections lies a truth science later confirmed, that pleasure and purpose are not the same. Pleasure is a spark, purpose is the fire it can light if tended carefully. Too much spark without tending and the flame burns out of control. Too little and life goes dim. Every tradition, from Stoic to Buddhist, tried to teach this balance, to let desire exist but not be enslaved by it. They were early theorists of balance, philosophers writing, unknowingly, about the same homeostasis our neurons now practice every moment. Even the stories of temptation, the forbidden fruit, the golden calf, Pandora's box, can be read as old parables about dopamine. They warned of the thrill of the unknown and the cost of endless curiosity. Not to scold, but to remind. Every gift of wanting carries the echo of its shadow. In each myth, desire is never evil, only powerful. It can lift a life into brilliance or scatter it into pieces. It depends on how gently it's held. And yet, there's kindness in that chaos. Because without wanting, we would never move. No one would plant seeds, paint murals, invent stories, or reach for one another's hands. Desire, in its purest form, is simply the feeling that life could be a little more. It's the universe leaning toward itself. Dopamine is just the measurable shimmer of that leaning. If the ancients saw longing as a divine force, it's because they recognized its mystery. It arrives uninvited, changes everything, and leaves behind both beauty and ache. And while modern science has traced its molecules, we haven't lessened its wonder. We've only translated it. The myth still lives in our biology. You can see it in the small things. The child reaching toward a star, the poet searching for the right word, the traveller walking a little farther than planned. The language has changed, but the rhythm is ancient. The same energy that built temples to Aphrodite builds our endless archives of dreams and goals. The same yearning that monks try to quiet still hums beneath our scrolling thumbs. Every generation writes its own verse of the same song. The harmony of reaching and resting, the duet of curiosity and peace. So when we speak of dopamine, perhaps we're not reducing mystery but rediscovering it. The molecule doesn't erase the poetry, it confirms it. It tells us that the body was always the poem, that every pulse of anticipation, every sigh of fulfillment is written in flesh as much as in myth. There's a certain gentle humour in realising that our neurons are storytellers too. They keep records of reward and disappointment, lessons and longing, just as the old myths did. The brain's chemistry is simply the language evolution used to write its own stories of wanting. And perhaps that's why, despite all our progress, we still find ourselves asking the same questions the philosophers once did. What should we want? How much is enough? What happens when the thing we chase finally stands still? These aren't just spiritual puzzles, they're neurological ones too. And they all share one quiet answer: balance. As our ancestors told stories to understand longing, we now run experiments to measure it. But both pursuits are the same, an attempt to make peace with the restlessness that makes us human. The myths were early neuroscience told in poetry, and neuroscience, in its own way, is myth retold in data. Both are songs about the same yearning heart. And so, as the old candlelight fades and the hum of modern life grows, we can see how the story continues. The gods of desire have not vanished. They have changed form. They now live in algorithms, advertisements, and glowing screens, new voices calling to the same old chemistry. Our next step in this journey leads us there, into the laboratories and the living rooms of the modern age, where science began to give desire its modern face, and where the story of dopamine as a molecule truly began. The trail now leads us from temples and myths into laboratories and notebooks, where the story of dopamine was first written in light instead of legend. The ancient poets had described longing in verses. The modern scientists would find it pulsing in living tissue. It was still desire, but now it could be measured, drawn, and named. In the early 20th century, chemists began noticing strange, luminous substances appearing whenever nerves fired. They didn't yet know what these flickers were, just that messages were somehow leaping across invisible spaces between cells. It was as if the brain were not one continuous organ, but a galaxy of tiny stars, each sending sparks to its neighbours. Among those sparks one would eventually be called dopamine. The name itself sounds almost casual now, like something that has always existed, but it wasn't identified as a unique molecule until the mid-1900s. Before that, scientists assumed it was just a byproduct of another chemical, a faint echo rather than a voice of its own. Then, in 1957, a quiet discovery changed everything. A Swedish scientist named Arvid Carlsson found that dopamine wasn't a background character, it was the conductor of movement and motivation. When he reduced dopamine levels in animal brains, motion slowed to near stillness. When he restored it, the world came alive again. At first, this seemed purely mechanical, like discovering that an engine needs a specific spark to turn. But when Carlsson's findings reached doctors treating people with Parkinson's disease, the implications deepened. Parkinson's had long puzzled medicine. People's minds stayed clear, but their bodies grew slow, stiff, hesitant. When researchers tried giving them a chemical that could transform into dopamine inside the brain, something called L-Dopa, many began to move again. Faces lifted, hands steadied. It wasn't magic, but it was close. The discovery won Carlsson a Nobel Prize decades later, but more than that, it gave life back to thousands. Around the same time, two other researchers, James Olds and Peter Milner, were running an experiment that would reveal another side of dopamine's nature, one both wondrous and unsettling. They placed tiny electrodes in specific parts of a rat's brain, connected to a small lever the animal could press. They expected the rats to press it occasionally out of curiosity, but once the current hit the area that later proved rich in dopamine fibers, something extraordinary happened. The rats pressed the lever again and again, hundreds, then thousands of times, ignoring food, sleep, even pain. They weren't seeking a physical reward. They were seeking the feeling of maybe next. It was the first time science had glimpsed craving stripped of content, desire without object. The experiment became famous and unsettling because it mirrored a pattern we'd recognize later in ourselves: the endless scroll, the repeated refresh, the search that has no ending. Olds and Milner didn't know it yet, but they had found the circuitry of motivation itself. The rat's behavior wasn't pleasure in the usual sense, it was pursuit. Dopamine wasn't delivering satisfaction, it was teaching anticipation. The system wasn't built to rest in contentment, it was built to move toward it, endlessly. In the years that followed, researchers began to see dopamine everywhere. In movement, learning, addiction, creativity. It was like discovering a single melody played in every piece of music. Too little of it, and life slows. Too much, and it spins. The trick is in the tempo. The molecule also began revealing its contradictions. When scientists increased dopamine in certain brain regions, animals seemed euphoric, exploratory and focused. But increase it too much, and their perception blurred, patterns appeared where none existed. That observation led to another insight. Some symptoms of schizophrenia, racing thoughts, illusions of meaning, were linked to an overactive dopamine system. Suddenly, the same molecule that helped a person move could also distort how they think. It was both muse and mischief maker, rhythm and dissonance in one. In this period, science found itself humbled. The more dopamine revealed, the more it resisted simple definition. It was not the pleasure chemical, as headlines later claimed. It was not happiness itself. It was a messenger of possibility, the signal that said something good could happen. The outcome didn't matter as much as the anticipation. Carlsson himself once said that dopamine was a system of motivation, not of joy. In other words, it's the whisper that keeps life reaching forward. And perhaps that's why humans and rats alike keep pressing their levers, literal or metaphorical, not to reach the end, but to stay in motion. When you think about it, the history of dopamine mirrors the history of human progress. We discover something that makes us move faster, think clearer, feel more alive, and then we must learn how to use it without losing balance. Fire, electricity, algorithms, dopamine, each one a spark with two edges. The same curiosity that lifted science from myth can, without reflection, become another cycle of craving. But the scientists themselves were rarely cynics. Many described their work with awe, as if they were uncovering a mystery older than language. Some said that watching neurons fire was like listening to the body sing. They found beauty in patterns, meaning in molecules. They knew that what they were seeing wasn't the soul itself, but perhaps its echo. And that's where this part of the story leaves us, standing between wonder and caution. Science gave longing a name, a structure, a pathway, but it didn't explain the ache that lingers even when every neuron is firing perfectly. It didn't explain why some desires lead to joy, while others lead to emptiness. That part remains our work, to turn knowledge into wisdom, to let understanding soften into care. As the hum of machines fades in the laboratory, our journey moves once again toward the world beyond, the glowing world of modern life, where dopamine's ancient rhythm meets the speed of algorithms. From sacred temples to silicon towers, we now live in a culture built to stimulate the same circuitry our ancestors prayed to understand. And so, our next chapter drifts softly into the present, the age of digital desire. As the world hums with electric light and quiet screens, our story arrives in the present, a time where dopamine has found new companions. The ancient temples of desire have become luminous rectangles that fit in your hand. Their altars glow with notifications, each one promising a small pulse of joy. Humanity, it seems, has learned to build its own levers. Every swipe, every scroll, every red bubble carries the same quiet whisper once heard by those rats in the 1950s. Maybe next. A message, a like, a sale, a glimpse of novelty. The brain leans forward, curious, hopeful, and the molecule obeys. Dopamine doesn't know whether the signal comes from a forest path, a lover's glance, or a glowing screen. To it, all anticipation is equal. The difference lies only in what follows, fulfillment or fatigue. You might notice this in the rhythm of your own day. A moment of boredom invites the flicker of a screen. You reach without thinking. The feed refreshes. A few seconds of reward, then quiet, then the next reach. It's not pleasure that keeps you scrolling. It's the soft hum of anticipation. The system has learned that the almost feels safer than the enough. Technology, for all its brilliance, has learned to speak dopamine's language fluently. The engineers who design social media, games, and streaming platforms may not call it that, but they build for attention. And attention is dopamine's favourite currency. They fine-tune sounds, colours and timing to keep the mind expectant. The result is not evil, it's effective. A civilization optimised for curiosity but not for calm. It's easy to think of this as manipulation, but it's more accurate to see it as a mirror. We built these systems from our own instincts. The same neural patterns that helped our ancestors hunt, gather and explore now guide our clicks and taps. We've simply multiplied the opportunities for anticipation until the anticipation itself has become the main event. This world of constant stimulation isn't all bad. It has given us connection, creativity and access to wonder. But it also floods the reward system with more novelty than it can gracefully hold. The peaks rise higher, the valleys fall deeper, and the baseline, that gentle hum of steady contentment, begins to fade. In a sense, we live in an age of amplified craving. The orchestra plays louder than ever, but sometimes the melody gets lost in the noise. Different cultures have noticed this imbalance in their own ways. In Japan, there is a word for the quiet antidote, ikigai, the reason to rise in the morning. It's not about big rewards or constant excitement. It's about balance, finding meaning in the ordinary, joy in contribution, beauty in patience. a fisherman, a teacher, a gardener. Each lives within a rhythm where dopamine's peaks and troughs form a stable wave. Effort and rest become inseparable. In Sweden, another word carries a similar spirit: lagom, just enough. It describes a way of life that avoids extremes, not too much, not too little, the right amount. It's a philosophy of balance written into daily rituals, coffee breaks that pause the day, long walks that invite silence, design that values emptiness as much as form. In cultures like these, dopamine is not a spark that burns out, but a steady lantern that guides. Perhaps this is what modern life is relearning, that the solution to overstimulation isn't deprivation but rhythm. The brain doesn't need to be starved of reward. It needs rewards that unfold slowly enough to feel real. A long conversation instead of a quick post. A walk that ends nowhere. A task completed with care. These small, steady satisfactions recalibrate the system, reminding it that not every spark must become a firework. When you practice stillness, the first thing you might notice is discomfort. The restless pull to reach for something, anything. That's dopamine, used to motion, asking, what now? If you stay with that feeling, breathe through it, let it fade, the system begins to learn. It remembers how to rest between the notes. After a while, peace itself starts to register as reward. You might try an experiment. Leave your phone in another room for an hour and step outside. Notice how quickly the mind begins to fill the quiet. First with impatience, then with memory, then with something softer. The chirp of birds, the rhythm of your own breath, the air moving past your skin. These are the slow rewards that built our species, the ones dopamine evolved to notice before screens arrived. We can't go back to a world without technology, nor should we. Curiosity and connection are part of what makes us human. But perhaps the challenge now is to make technology serve the same values that ancient stories once did, to help us wonder without being lost, to reach without forgetting to rest. In the end, the tools themselves are neutral. It's the rhythm of their use that matters. A scroll that connects you to beauty or laughter still nourishes the brain. A scroll that numbs you is simply the same lever, pressed without meaning. The chemistry doesn't judge, it listens, and it will learn whatever pattern you teach it, even if that pattern is noise. So the question becomes not, how do I escape dopamine? But, how do I teach it what truly matters? The answer may be as simple as rediscovering small rituals, moments where attention and care return to the same place. When you cook without distraction, or write by hand, or talk with someone without checking the clock, dopamine settles into a different mode, not spiking, but humming. It rewards presence, not pursuit, and maybe that's how we begin to retrain not just our minds, but our entire culture, one quiet moment at a time. A civilization's reward system, after all, is built from its people's habits. If we each learn to slow our own cycles, to savor over scroll, the culture itself begins to change. So, as this part of our story fades into evening, imagine the glow of your screen dimming and the older light of the world returning. The sunset, the lamp, the fire. Desire doesn't vanish there, it softens, it begins to breathe again. From here, our journey drifts towards something gentler, the state where dopamine feels most at home, the place between focus and freedom, work and peace, the steady pulse of flow. The trail of our story now leads us towards stillness, not the absence of movement, but the kind of motion that feels effortless. It's the state where effort and ease blend so seamlessly that you forget to count the difference. Scientists call it flow, poets call it grace. But your body has always known it as peace in motion, the moment when dopamine finds its favourite rhythm. Flow doesn't announce itself with fireworks or adrenaline. It begins quietly, like a current gathering beneath calm water. You might slip into it while painting, running, writing, gardening, or repairing something by hand. The mind narrows gently, the noise of self recedes, and the task becomes everything. The clock fades, but attention sharpens. It's not that time stops, it's that time becomes irrelevant. Inside your brain, something remarkable is happening. Dopamine hums in steady pulses, not in spikes. It balances with other messengers, focus chemicals that sharpen awareness, and calm ones that keep anxiety away. It's like a duet between curiosity and serenity. The brain's reward system no longer chases the next thing, it rewards the present act itself. Each moment of concentration becomes its own small completion. If the earlier parts of our story were about craving and chasing, this is about arrival. Flow is what dopamine sounds like when it finally learns to breathe. Think about the last time you felt completely absorbed in something simple. Arranging flowers, kneading dough, writing a sentence that finally felt right. You weren't forcing yourself to continue, you simply didn't want to stop. That gentle satisfaction, the sense of just enough, is dopamine's quiet applause. Scientists have tried to measure flow, how the balance between challenge and skill creates this perfect harmony. If a task is too easy, boredom creeps in. If it's too hard, frustration rises. But when the two meet just right, the mind steps into rhythm. Dopamine adjusts its levels precisely, encouraging focus without pressure, energy without chaos. It's the same logic a river follows. When the banks are clear and the slope is steady, the water moves with grace. This is why certain practices, painting, music, sport, cooking, seem to renew us. They remind the dopamine system that joy is sustainable when it doesn't depend on novelty. The rhythm of progress becomes its own source of pleasure. It's no longer about external reward but about participation, the feeling of being in tune with yourself. Flow has been described by psychologists as the most fulfilling state a human can experience, not because it's dramatic but because it's whole. In flow, the boundary between you and what you're doing softens. Your hands move, your thoughts follow, and the sense of control becomes effortless. It's the same calm intensity a dancer feels when their body moves before their mind can command it, or a potter feels when clay responds like memory. Even everyday life holds this potential. Washing dishes can become a meditation when you notice the warmth of water and the rhythm of rinsing. Walking a familiar path can feel like flight when your thoughts fall into step with your body. Flow doesn't ask for brilliance, it asks for presence. And in return, it offers peace, the kind that lasts longer than excitement because it doesn't depend on outcome. If you could look inside the brain during flow, you'd see a kind of elegant economy. Areas responsible for self-criticism and overthinking grow quieter. The pathways for coordination and focus light up. Dopamine rises just enough to keep you engaged but not restless. The mind becomes its own ecosystem, efficient, self-balancing, alive. What's fascinating is that this state is available to everyone, regardless of talent or profession. It doesn't belong only to artists or athletes. Flow can emerge while mending clothes, tending a garden, coding, or even solving a puzzle. It appears wherever intention and attention meet without resistance. The key is gentle challenge, something that asks just enough of you to make the mind lean forward, but not so much that it tips. Modern life often pulls us away from this rhythm. Multitasking fragments attention, notifications interrupt momentum. Yet flow is still there, waiting beneath the noise like a familiar song you can return to once you remember the tune. It's why so many mindfulness practices feel restorative. They train the mind to notice again, to move without racing. In this balance of focus and ease, dopamine finally performs the role it was meant for. It becomes not a signal of wanting, but a rhythm of being. It keeps the mind engaged, the heart calm, the body fluent. You might even say that flow is the state where dopamine fulfills its purpose, to guide you not toward reward, but toward meaning, and the benefits ripple outward. People who spend time in flow often describe feeling clearer, more connected, even more compassionate afterward. The chemistry of calm engagement seems to teach the body that balance is not only possible, but pleasurable. Once learned, it becomes easier to return to. You can nurture this state by creating small rituals of single focus, turning off distractions while you cook, writing by hand instead of typing, spending a few minutes each day doing something for no reason other than its quiet satisfaction. These moments retrain dopamine to settle into harmony rather than chase intensity. The world may still be loud, but within that noise there is space for your own rhythm. Flow is not escape. It's a way of listening to yourself, to your craft, to the world's quieter signals. It's dopamine's softest song, and perhaps its most beautiful one. As the day fades and the body begins to slow, this rhythm deepens even more. Flow gives way to ritual, the gentle patterns that keep the system steady when the mind no longer wants to move. Our next part of the journey drifts there, into the rituals and routines that lull dopamine into rest, the small daily habits that turn chemistry into comfort and awareness into peace. As we follow the rhythm further, the current begins to slow. The sun that once sparkled on the surface of attention now glows softer, turning the world gold. This is the season of the day and of the mind, when motion gives way to ritual, the time when dopamine, that restless spark, learns to hum instead of sing. If flow is the dance of focus, ritual is the lullaby that follows. It is the repetition that doesn't bore but soothes, the familiar sequence that teaches the brain, you're safe now, you can rest. While the word routine may sound dull, the brain treats it as sacred. Predictability gives it comfort. Each small repeated act signals stability, a pattern the nervous system can trust. You might not think of your morning coffee or your evening walk as neurochemistry, but they are conversations between body and brain. Every repeated pattern creates a rhythm of expectation and reward. The scent of coffee, for example, might trigger a small pulse of dopamine before the first sip even reaches your lips. The mind has learned that warmth and energy are coming, and it responds in kind. The same happens with the quiet creak of a favourite chair, the sound of a kettle, the first page of a book. These cues tell your brain that something pleasant, gentle and familiar is on its way. In this way, rituals are dopamine's lullabies. They allow the reward system to hum in the background without strain. You're not chasing anything. You're simply participating in a cycle that brings calm predictability. It's the same mechanism that soothes children to sleep. The bedtime story, the dimming light, the steady tone of a parent's voice. The body recognizes the pattern and releases the chemistry of trust. Unlike the quick hits of novelty that flood and fade, rituals build something more lasting, what scientists might call tonic dopamine, the steady, low rhythm that supports well-being without overstimulation. It's the gentle baseline of contentment, like a candle's steady flame compared to the spark of a match. You can feel this difference in your own life. A sudden burst of excitement feels thrilling, but leaves an echo of restlessness. A repeated ritual, tea in the same mug, soft music at the same hour, brings peace that lingers. The dopamine still flows, but quietly, aligning itself with predictability instead of surprise. The system relaxes because it no longer needs to guess. It already knows that comfort is coming. This is why cultures throughout history have built their days around ritual. Prayer at dawn, shared meals at noon, storytelling at dusk. Each of these moments anchors the mind to time and place, marking transitions that would otherwise blur. They are small acts of balance, reminders that life's meaning isn't only found in new experiences, but in the repetition that gives those experiences shape. In the modern world, where, Each day can feel like an unbroken stream of tasks and screens. We can reclaim these small sanctuaries. You don't need elaborate ceremonies to create them. Lighting a candle before work, taking 3 slow breaths before eating, writing a line of gratitude before sleep. Each is a signal, a rhythm. Over time, your brain learns to anticipate calm itself. You might notice that when you repeat these acts often enough, they start to feel like home. That's dopamine, quietly marking the connection between ritual and peace. The chemical doesn't distinguish between spiritual and mundane. It simply notes, this pattern brings comfort. Repetition becomes reassurance. Even humour plays a role here, the lightness that keeps the system flexible. Laughter is a natural dopamine pulse that resets the body's rhythm. It loosens tension, releases stored energy, and reminds the brain that not everything needs to be serious. A shared laugh, a playful mistake, a gentle joke. All of these reset chemistry the way rain resets the air. You don't have to laugh loudly for it to help. Even a smile sends its message inward. Life is safe enough to be silly. If you listen carefully, you'll find that your entire day already carries these natural cues. The slow brightening of morning, the hunger that calls for food, the cooling of evening, the drowsiness before sleep. Each one is a reminder of rhythm. Dopamine isn't separate from these patterns. It moves within them, adjusting gently to the cycles of life. When you align with that natural pulse instead of fighting it, motivation and rest stop competing. They become partners in a single song. Even rest itself, true, deep rest, is not the absence of dopamine, but its quiet recalibration. During sleep, the system restores its sensitivity. It tidies the pathways of learning, prunes the noise, resets the baseline. You might say that while you sleep, dopamine dreams too, preparing to greet the next morning with curiosity again. To help this process, the body appreciates predictability, sleeping at similar times, dimming the lights before bed, avoiding sudden stimulation. Each signal tells your inner chemistry, it's time to slow. Over time, these small acts create something far greater than discipline. They create harmony. There's an old saying, we don't rise to our goals, we fall to our habits. From a biochemical view, this is perfectly true. Your dopamine system doesn't wait for grand ambition. It listens to what you repeat daily. It learns that your small rituals, your first sip of water, your evening reflection, your quiet laugh, are the steady beats of a balanced life. So perhaps the secret to happiness isn't constant excitement or escape, but this, the cultivation of familiar joys. The small acts you perform without fanfare are the anchors that keep the mind from drifting too far in any one direction. And when life becomes unpredictable, these routines are where the nervous system goes to rest, like a bird returning to its nest. When you sit with a cup of tea or fold a blanket or listen to the same song that always calms you, remember that these aren't small indulgences. They're the body's way of remembering safety. They're how dopamine learns that not every reward must dazzle. Some rewards simply hold you. And as the day draws to a close, you might notice that the rhythm we've been following, curiosity, effort, rest, mirrors the same arc that guides the whole story of being human. The chemistry that once fueled myths and machines now finds peace in the gentlest of patterns. The cycle of work and pause, of attention and release. From here, the story will drift once more into the future, where new questions wait. Questions about control, freedom, and what happens when we begin to design the very desires that guide us. But before we step into that horizon, take one last slow breath and let the simple truth settle. Peace is not the absence of reward. It's the steady hum of one that never needs to end. As night deepens, our journey turns toward a new horizon, one not carved from myth or memory, but from possibility. The story of dopamine, once written in ancient poetry and lab notebooks, now reaches the edge of something extraordinary and uncertain. For the first time in history, Humanity is beginning to edit the very chemistry of its own longing. You can almost imagine a quiet laboratory glowing in blue light. Machines hum softly. Screens display maps of the brain like constellations. Somewhere, a scientist adjusts a setting, and a pulse of light travels into living neurons. A signal flickers, then fades. In that instant, a thought is altered, a habit softened, a fear erased. This isn't science fiction. It's the slow unfolding of what researchers call neuroengineering. At its heart lies a simple but profound question. What happens when we learn to change what we want? In recent years, technologies have emerged that can listen to the language of the brain more precisely than ever before. Electrodes fine as hair can detect tiny electrical whispers, the pattern of anticipation, the quiet hum of reward. Some can even send signals back, calming a restless circuit or waking a silent one. They're called brain-computer interfaces, but they could just as easily be called bridges, delicate connections between thought and tool. For people living with severe depression, Parkinson's, or addiction, these technologies hold immense promise. They can restore movement, stabilize mood, quiet storms that once seemed unending. Each success is a miracle of compassion and precision. But behind the triumph hides a quieter question. Where does healing end and editing begin? If we can ease suffering by adjusting the chemistry of desire, could we one day amplify happiness, remove boredom, program motivation itself? It's a thought that sounds almost tempting, like the mythic wish for a life without pain. Yet anyone who has followed Dopamine's story knows that too much ease is not peace, it is emptiness. Desire, in all its restless imperfection, gives life texture. It moves us, teaches us, makes our choices meaningful. If we erase the ache of wanting, what happens to the joy of becoming? The paradox is clear. The very molecule that tempts us to chase is also what gives that chase its worth. The same question echoes in quieter corners of modern life, in the algorithms that shape our feeds, in the targeted ads that seem to know us better than we know ourselves. These systems, though far simpler than the brain, play a similar role. They learn what we want and then teach us to want more of it. The loop tightens until desire itself begins to feel automated. We stop wondering why we want and simply follow the next suggestion. It's easy to imagine this as control, but it's also a mirror. Algorithms and neurochemistry speak the same dialect of attention. They learn from repetition, predict what will satisfy us, and adjust accordingly. The question isn't whether we can escape this loop, it's whether we can guide it. Because freedom, in this new landscape, may not mean resisting dopamine, but learning to dance with it. Like a skilled partner in a waltz, you don't overpower the rhythm. You move with it, shaping its flow while staying aware of its pull. Each step is choice and surrender, discipline and grace. In this dance, awareness becomes the new form of autonomy. The moment you notice a craving, a habit, or a thought trying to steer you, you've already stepped back into freedom. Dopamine may start the movement, but consciousness decides the choreography. Some thinkers believe that in the future, our relationship with dopamine will become more intentional. Instead of being passively carried by impulses, we'll design lives that balance stimulation and serenity, much like tuning an instrument to harmony rather than noise. Meditation, art, and deliberate rest may become as essential as medicine, teaching the nervous system to self-edit gently from within. There's even talk of using gene therapy to adjust dopamine sensitivity to make it less fragile, less prone to chaos. A future where sadness could be softened and obsession eased without losing depth or meaning. But the challenge will always remain the same, to change the signal without erasing the song. Ethics, in this story, are less about fear and more about care. The goal is not to avoid progress, but to stay human within it. To remember that we are more than our chemistry, even as we learn to speak its language. The true risk isn't that we'll lose our humanity. but that we'll forget to listen to the small, quiet voice that reminds us why we care to begin with. If someone could hand you a device that guaranteed constant motivation, no procrastination, no doubt no fatigue, would you take it? Maybe. But imagine what you'd lose: the satisfaction of overcoming resistance, the quiet pride of effort, the sweetness of rest. Even the pauses, the hesitations, give meaning to motion. The flaws in the system are what make it beautiful. So perhaps the real evolution isn't about controlling dopamine, but understanding it. To know its patterns, respect its rhythm, and work with it rather than against it. Freedom isn't rejecting desire, it's learning to choose which desires to feed. When seen this way, the future of the mind becomes less mechanical and more musical. We won't just engineer circuits, we'll compose them. We'll learn to tune our chemistry like instruments, not for endless excitement, but for balance, depth, and peace. And maybe that's the truest kind of progress, not to silence longing, but to make it wise. As we leave this speculative horizon, the light of dawn begins to return. The machines fade, and what remains is the listener. You, the quiet witness of all this motion, the awareness behind every spark. The final part of our journey will rest here, in that awareness itself, the one who observes, learns, and gently chooses. Because behind all the currents of dopamine, there is something still, something that simply listens. And so, our journey begins to quiet. The long arc of curiosity that carried us from ancient myths to modern molecules now comes home, not to the brain, but to the awareness that holds it. The story of dopamine, after all, is only the story of movement. The deeper story is the one that listens beneath that motion, the stillness that remains when all the signals fade. You can feel that stillness even now if you pay attention. The body breathes, the heart keeps time, tiny electrical rivers shimmer through the mind. And yet, somewhere behind all of that, there's a listener, calm, silent, watching. It doesn't rise or fall with dopamine. It doesn't need to chase or rest. It simply is. For all our fascination with chemistry, that awareness has never been captured in a test tube or image. Scientists can map where dopamine fires, where it flows, where it changes behavior. But the quiet knowing that experiences those changes cannot be measured. It sits beyond the map, like the sky around a constellation. Without it, none of the lights would make sense. You might think of it as the space between notes in a song, the pauses that give shape to melody. Dopamine provides the rhythm, but consciousness is the one who hears it. It's the difference between being swept by a feeling and noticing that you're feeling it, between being the spark and watching it flicker. Throughout this long story, we've seen dopamine act like a compass, pointing toward what the brain has learned to value, driving the cycles of wanting, learning, and resting. But a compass doesn't walk the path. You do. And that perhaps is what makes human freedom so quietly profound. We may not choose every desire that rises, but we can choose which to follow. The great challenge and gift of awareness is that it lets you stand beside your chemistry instead of inside it. When you feel a rush of excitement or a wave of craving, you can whisper to yourself, "This is my brain asking for movement." When you feel emptiness or stillness, you can say, "This is my body asking for pause." In that small act of noticing, you become more than the signal. You become the space that allows it to exist. There's an old meditation phrase, "You are the sky, the thoughts are the clouds." Dopamine is one of those clouds, bright, lively, constantly shifting. It gives shape to weather, but not to the sky itself. The sky holds everything, unshaken. Perhaps enlightenment, in the language of science, is simply a new dopamine map, one that rewards being as much as becoming. It's not the end of desire, but the softening of its grip. Wanting continues, but it becomes transparent, almost kind. You still move, but the movement feels lighter, less hungry. The brain keeps learning, but the heart stops hurrying. You might begin to sense this shift in small moments. The pause before answering a message, the breath before a bite of food, the way silence feels after laughter fades. Each is a doorway back to awareness, a reminder that you're not trapped in the loop of reward and response. You can step out, look around, and smile. The mind's chemistry is magnificent, but it's not your master. It's more like an orchestra following your cue. When you slow down, it softens. When you rest, it retunes. When you listen, it listens back. In that shared rhythm, science and spirit finally meet, not as opposites, but as reflections of the same wonder. If there's a lesson to carry from all this, it's that dopamine doesn't control you. It collaborates with you. It learns from your choices. Each time you pause to appreciate rather than pursue, you teach it patience. Each time you find joy in simplicity, you teach it gratitude. Over years, those lessons become the quiet architecture of a balanced mind, a map of meaning traced by kindness. In that sense, you're both the composer and the music. Dopamine provides the notes, but you decide the melody. It's a conversation that never ends, a gentle duet between biology and awareness. Even the restless parts of yourself, the habits, the cravings, the distractions, belong in this harmony. They're not enemies to defeat, but signals to understand. When you treat them with curiosity instead of judgment, their volume softens. They begin to teach you rather than chase you. The restless spark that once demanded can become the candle that lights reflection. And then, slowly, you begin to see how everything fits together. The myths, the science, the everyday moments. From eros to electricity, from ancient longing to digital loops, all of it is one long story of a universe trying to feel itself through living beings. Dopamine is simply the handwriting. Awareness is the paper it's written on. When you see it this way, even ordinary moments begin to shimmer. Making breakfast, walking home at dusk, watching light move through water. They feel alive again. The world stops being something to conquer and becomes something to listen to. So tonight, as this journey reaches its end, take a slow breath. Feel how it rises, how it falls, how it keeps you anchored in this small miracle of being. Whatever your dopamine is doing, pulsing, resting, singing, it's all part of a grander stillness that watches from within. You're not your molecules, you're the calm between their sparks. And maybe that's what peace truly is, the realization that nothing needs to be fixed, only noticed. That behind the wanting, beneath the noise, there's already a presence that feels whole. So let the orchestra fade, let the lights dim. You've travelled through myths and machines, through chemistry and choice, and now you can rest. The compass still turns, but the traveller has found home. Thank you for walking this quiet path, for listening, for wondering, for breathing through each discovery. May your nights be steady, your mornings light, and your dopamine hum softly in the rhythm of a life that feels enough. Sleep peacefully, dear listener. The story has ended, but the awareness that heard it, that will never fade,